Chapter 1921. Yi Xian couldn't do anything about this Xiong Ho's entanglement. Who asked him to be unable to defeat it? At this moment, the Heavenly Abyss Saintess recovered a little. She looked at Yi Xian and said, "Thank you, young Master Yi, for saving my life." Yi Xian said with smile, "Saintess, I am looking forward to the benefits you are going to give me." The Heavenly Abyss Holy Maiden hesitated for a moment, then said, "Young Master Yi, can you follow me to the Heavenly Abyss Divine Sect?" Yi Xian frowned. Tianyuan Sacred Sect? The Heavenly Abyss Holy Maiden nodded. Yi Xian turned to look at Xiong Ho. Xiong Ho giggled, "Whatever you say." Yi Xian thought about it and said, "Then let's go to the Tianyuan Divine Sect." Xiong Ho glanced at the Heaven Abyss Holy Maiden and Yi Xian, and an almost undetectable smile appeared on her face. Moments later, Yi Xian and Xiong Ho followed the Heavenly Abyss Saintess to the Heavenly Abyss Sacred Sect. He had gained a lot from this trip to the mystic realm. Now, after fusing with the mysterious spacetime, he could persist for an hour. Not only that, but he could also throw the tower 3 times in a short period of time. The only pity was that he still couldn't use the spacetime pressure of the mysterious spacetime. If he could use the spacetime pressure of the mysterious spacetime, his strength would rise to another level. There was another thing that was a pain in the ass, and that was the Xiong Ho. He couldn't get rid of this little girl now, and he knew that there would be big trouble soon. Divine Dao Nation. Inside the palace, Musa walked to the front of the Divine Dao plume and bowed slightly. Fang Lin is dead. Divine Dao Ling frowned slightly. It couldn't have been that guy who killed him, right? Fang Lin told us that he was killed by Yi Xian. However, according to the information we received, he was killed by someone else. Musa said in a deep voice. Divine Dao Ling was perplexed. Then why did Fang Lin send a message back saying that young Master Yi killed him? Musa shook his head, "I don't know." The Divine Dao Ling's expression darkened. "You're still trying to scam me even after you're dead. What's wrong with him?" Musa said, "Your Majesty, we have received news that the very ones are looking for young Master Yi." The Divine Dao Ling immediately got up and left. Musa was stunned, and then he said, "Your Majesty, where are you going?" The Divine Dao plume didn't even turn its head. Musa still wanted to say something, but in the next moment, his expression changed drastically because he noticed that there were 12 people following behind the Divine Dao feather. These 12 people were all dressed in white armor and had golden sabers at their waists. Divine Dao Army. Musa was a little dumbfounded. Why was he mobilizing the Divine Dao Army? Not long after Yi Xian's group of 3 left the City of Infinite Domains, the space in front of them suddenly trembled violently. Then, a powerful aura swept out from the trembling space. Yi Xian was speechless. He knew it had to be the very ones. Right at this moment, the trembling space suddenly split open, and then a middle-aged man walked out from within. Yi Xian's face sank when he saw this middle-aged man. Very strong. He had definitely surpassed the life chart realm. Next to Yi Xian, the Heavenly Abyss Holy Maiden said in a low voice, "Tai Yiyan, the leader of the very ones." Tai Yiyan looked at Yi Xian's group of 3. Finally, his gaze fell on Xiong Ho. When he saw Xiong Ho, his eyes became serious. Yi Xian immediately said, "The one who killed your people is this lady. If you want revenge, please do it." Xiong Ho rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. "Little brother, you are so heartless." Yi Xian ignored Xiong Ho. Tai Yiyan looked at Xiong Ho for a long time. After a long time, he asked, "What is your name?" Xiong Ho giggled. "Don't you want revenge? Why aren't you doing it?" Tai Yiyan's expression was a little ugly. He wanted revenge, but he could not see through this little girl. The very ones were not weak in the Divine Dao Nation, but they were not invincible. Even the very ones did not dare to say they were invincible. Moreover, this little girl had walked out of the relic. Xiong Ho suddenly laughed. "If you don't do it, then I will." As she spoke, she opened her palm, and a flame suddenly appeared in her hand. Tai Ian's expression changed drastically. He suddenly stomped his right foot. In an instant, the surrounding spacetime seemed to collapse and pour down. Yi Xian's expression darkened. This guy is fierce. Xiong Ho smirked, and the flame in her hands suddenly flew out. The next moment, Tai Ian's body began to burn. Boom! In an instant, Tai Ian's physical body collapsed. Tai Ian was shocked. His soul wanted to escape, but the flame still wrapped around him. Just as Tai Ian's soul was about to dissipate, a golden light suddenly descended from the sky and enveloped him. Under the golden light, the flame gradually disappeared. Xiong Ho turned to look. Not far away, a woman slowly walked over. It was the divine Dao Plume. The divine Dao Plume waved its right hand, and the powerful flame around Tai Ian disappeared. Tai Ian's expression eased up, and then he bowed slightly to the divine Dao Plume. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Yi Xian glanced at the divine Dao Plume. Damn it. So this woman is strong as well. Fortunately, she courted death and went to look for Qing. Otherwise, I would probably be in trouble. The divine Dao Plume gazed at Yi Xian and grinned. "Young Master Yi." Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Ling, we meet again." Miss Ling. Tai Ian's expression instantly changed when he heard Yi Xian. This fellow actually dared to address His Majesty by name. To his shock, the divine Dao Plume actually wasn't angry. The divine Dao Plume sized up Yi Xian, and then she smiled. "Young Master Ye's strength has improved by quite a bit." Yi Xian smiled but didn't say anything. The divine Dao Plume turned around to gaze at Xiong Ho. As she gazed at Xiong Ho, the smile in her eyes gradually turned solemn. "What's your name?" Xiong Ho smiled. "You're the descendant of Shen Dao Ming." The divine Dao Plume smiled. "You know my ancestor?" Xiong Ho nodded. "I do. Your ancestor isn't bad. As for you." As she spoke, she sized up the divine Dao Plume and smiled. "You're barely passable." The divine Dao Plume grinned. "Senior, this is a misunderstanding. Can we just let it go?" Xiong Ho turned to look at Yi Xian. "I'll give him face." Yi Xian was speechless. This fellow dragged me into this again. The divine Dao Plume turned to look at Yi Xian and grinned. "Young Master Yi, please put in a good word for me." Yi Xian glanced at Tai Ian. "He wants to kill me." The divine Dao Plume turned to look at Tai Ian, and the latter hurriedly said, "Young Master Yi, this is a misunderstanding. I came here to meet young Master Yi." Yi Xian blinked. "Meet me?" Tai Ian hurriedly nodded. "Yes, I've long heard of young Master Ye's outstanding talent. I've admired you for a long time, so I specially came to meet young Master Yi today. Now that I've met you, it's true that hearing about you is not as good as meeting you in person." Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and smiled. "You don't have to do this, sir. You just need to know who killed your ultimate tribe people." Tai Ian hurriedly nodded. "I already know. This has nothing to do with young Master Yi." Yi Xian smiled, then looked at the Heavenly Abyss Holy Maiden. "Holy Maiden, we won't be going to the Heavenly Abyss Holy Sect. Let's part ways here." The Heavenly Abyss Holy Maiden frowned, somewhat puzzled. "Why?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, not saying a word. At this moment, Xiong Ho laughed. "He originally wanted to bring me to the Heavenly Abyss Holy Sect and then use you to get rid of me. But now, he realized that neither the Divine Dao Nation or the Heavenly Abyss Holy Sect can get rid of me. Do you understand?" The Heavenly Abyss Holy Maiden glanced at Yi Xian, not saying a word. Yi Xian looked at Xiong Ho. "Let's go." With that, he turned and left. Xiong Ho licked her sugar-coated paws, then followed. Seeing the two leave, Tai Ian immediately heaved a heavy sigh of relief. As if thinking of something, he looked at the divine Dao Ling. "Your Majesty, who exactly is that young Master Yi?" The divine Dao Ling said plainly, "Didn't you see that even that little girl didn't dare to hurt him? Tai Ian smiled bitterly. The divine Dao Ling said again, go back and heal your injuries. From now on, don't provoke this young Master Yi. Tai Ian bowed slightly, understood. With that, he turned and left. The divine Dao Ling watched Yi Xian and Xiong Ho disappear in the distance, a hint of worry flashing in his eyes. Yi Xian brought Xiong Ho back to the Women's Academy, then he brought Xiong Ho to Miss Ding. Yi Xian looked at Xiong Ho, talked to Miss Ding. With that, he turned and left. Xiong Ho looked at Miss Ding and licked her sugar-coated paws, not saying a word. Miss Ding said with a smile, he has that mysterious space-time on him. You want it but are afraid. What are you afraid of? They were afraid of his background. If I'm not wrong, you want to find out more about him now. Once you find out more about him and he doesn't pose much of a threat to you, you will not hesitate to kill him, right? Xiong Ho smiled and said, you're right. Miss Ding smiled and did not say anything else. Xiong Ho blinked. Aren't you worried? Miss Ding said with a smile, what should I be worried about? Xiong Ho looked at Miss Ding. Aren't you worried that I'll really kill him? Miss Ding patted Xiong Ho's shoulder lightly. All his enemies are toys that his sister left for him. With that, she turned and left. Xiong Ho suddenly asked, is his sister very strong? Miss Ding did not turn her head. Not very strong. You can meet her in the future if you have the chance. Xiong Ho licked her sugar-coated paws and said with a smile, I look forward to it. In the distance, Miss Ding shook her head with a smile and did not say anything else. No one wanted to meet that woman. Of course, that was except for Yi Xian. After Yi Xian entered Xiao Ta, he started to use the Azure Profound Sword to fuse with that mysterious spacetime. After returning, Miss Ding returned the Azure Profound Sword to him. With the Azure Profound Sword, he was confident that he could unleash the power of that mysterious spacetime. While Yi Xian was cultivating, Xiong Ho did not leave the women's college. Instead, she wandered around the women's college, 1 month later. In the Divine Dao Nation's palace, Musa suddenly entered the palace. He quickly walked to the Divine Dao Ling and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, something big has happened. The Divine Dao Ling put down the ancient book in his hand. What is it? Musa's expression was somewhat grave. I just received news that a group of mysterious experts suddenly entered our Divine Dao Nation and headed straight for the women's college. Divine Dao Ling frowned. Who is it? Musa shook his head. I don't know. The Divine Dao Plume fell silent. Could their target be young Master Yi? Musa asked solemnly. The Divine Dao Plume immediately said, he can't die. At least not in my Divine Dao Nation. Musa was confused. Why? The Divine Dao Ling said softly, if he dies in my Divine Dao Nation, my Divine Dao Nation will be buried with him. Understand? Musa. P.S. It's too inconvenient to pay New Year's greetings at home. Where could he go? Without a car, he had to wait for a bus for an hour and a half. It was too scary. Chapter 1922. In a small courtyard in the Women's Academy, Miss Ding, who was reading, suddenly raised her head, and then she frowned. A woman was flying over from afar, and there were 6 black-robed figures behind her. The woman in the lead was Shinqin. Meanwhile, Yi Xian appeared by Miss Ding's side, and his face fell when he saw Shinqin. She came so quickly. Xiong Ho appeared here as well, and then she glanced at Shinqin and grinned, Shinqin, you're a little too fast. Shinqin glanced at Xiong Ho, and then her gaze descended onto Yi Xian, young Master Yi, we meet again. Yi Xian smiled, Miss Shinqin, we won't interfere in the matters between the two of you. Shinqin shook her head, it was you who let her go. Yi Xian was slightly helpless, I didn't do it on purpose. Shinqin gazed at Yi Xian, we want to ask young Master Yi for a favor. Yi Xian frowned when he heard this. Shinqin asked, is young Master Yi unwilling? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Let me tell you, my Aunt Ding is here, so don't threaten me. As he spoke, he moved behind Miss Ding. His father might not care about him, but he would definitely care about Aunt Ding. Miss Ding shook her head and smiled when she heard Yi Xian. This fellow is really like a child. Shen Qin gazed at Miss Ding. We want to ask young Master Yi for a favor, is that all right? Miss Ding shook her head, no. Shen Qin's eyes narrowed slightly, then I won't hold back. As she spoke, she opened her palm and was about to attack. Meanwhile, Miss Ding suddenly said, isn't your target Miss Xiongho? Xiongho laughed. Actually, her main target isn't me, but young brother Yi. So long as she obtains that mysterious space, then she can easily seal me. Conversely, if young brother Yi helps me, then she can never seal me. Yi Xian hurriedly said, then you deal with her. Xiongho rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. She has 7 people, and I'm alone. I can't beat them. Unless you help me. Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, the divine quilt in the sky suddenly made a move. She pressed down lightly with her right hand. Boom! The entire space began to boil. Down below, Lady Ding smiled faintly. She opened her palm, and a ray of sword light suddenly soared into the sky. Boom! Before everyone could recover from their shock, the divine quilt was blasted a few tens of thousands of meters away, and when it finally stopped, its physical body had completely vanished. Only its soul remained, and its soul was extremely weak. Everyone was dumbfounded by this scene. Xiongho's expression changed as well. She stared at Miss Ding and said nothing. At this moment, Lady Ding opened her palm, and the sword light returned to her hand before disappearing. Yi Xian glanced at Miss Ding. Just as he had guessed, his father did leave something for Aunt Ding to save her life. In the distance, the divine quilt looked at Miss Ding in disbelief. You, Miss Ding smiled. Leave the Women's Academy. I'll only say this once. The divine quilt glanced at Miss Ding before retreating with the 6 people behind her. Yi Xian looked at Xiongho. She's seriously injured now. Aren't you going to deal with her? Xiongho rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. Don't you see that there are 6 people behind her? Yi Xian said in a low voice, but she's seriously injured now. This is a good opportunity for you to kill her. Xiongho blinked. Why don't we join forces? Yi Xian pursed his lips and turned to leave. Xiongho licked her candied fruit, then looked at Miss Ding. That sword light wasn't yours. Please continue to the next page. Miss Ding smiled. It really wasn't mine. Xiongho hurriedly asked, whose was it? Miss Ding smiled. I'm not telling you. With that, she turned to leave. Xiongho remained silent. Outside the Women's Academy, the divine quilt stopped with the 6 people. At this moment, all 7 of them had extremely grave expressions. Especially the divine quilt in the lead. She was almost insta-killed by that sword light. Whose sword light was that? Right at this moment, an old man behind her frowned and turned to look. Not far away, a woman walked out. It was the divine quilt. The divine quilt looked at the divine quilt. Who are you? The divine quilt frowned. And who are you? The divine quilt smiled. You're asking me who I am in my territory? The divine quilt said, you're the ruler of the divine Dao nation. The divine quilt smiled. Yes. The divine quilt was expressionless. This matter has nothing to do with your divine Dao nation. The divine quilt smiled. Understood. With that, she turned to leave. After the divine quilt left, an old man beside the divine quilt said, this woman is not simple. There were many mysterious and powerful auras in the surroundings just now. The divine quilt's expression was calm. Her ancestor was a great figure. The old man said, Divine daughter, what should we do next? It'll be extremely disadvantageous to us if that young man helps Xiong Ho. The divine quilt shook her head and sighed in silence. A short while later, the divine quilt said, "We can't allow that young man to help Xiong Ho. However, that young man is hostile towards us now, so it will only backfire if I go." The old man said in a low voice, "Then what should we do next?" The divine quilt fell silent for a moment before she said, "That young man possesses a mysterious space that can suppress numerous special types of space. What do you think the Tendo sect will do if they find out?" The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, "Divine daughter, you mean that we should get someone else to do the dirty work?" The divine quilt nodded. "Go back and do it." The old man bowed slightly. "Understood." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. The divine quilt closed her eyes slowly. If she was given another chance, she would try using a soft approach. Unfortunately, they were enemies now, so it was useless even if she tried using a soft approach. On the other side, the divine quilt arrived at Miss Ding's courtyard, and she smiled upon seeing her. "Miss Ding, please don't hold back if you need my divine Dao Nation's help." Miss Ding smiled, "Thank you." The divine quilt spoke in a low voice, "Those people aren't simple at all." Miss Ding smiled, "It's fine. Miss Ling doesn't have to worry about it. We'll deal with it ourselves." The divine quilt smiled, "Understood." She stood up and left as she spoke. Miss Ding remained silent after the divine quilt left, and then she stood up and left after a short while. Within a room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground while the space around him gradually warped. A mysterious space. After he relied on Xiao Ta, he was able to fuse with this mysterious space. Now, he was going to utilize the green profound sword to utilize this mysterious space. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the green profound sword appeared within it. He waved it lightly, and the space before him instantly became illusory. Yi Xian instantly became excited. It really was possible. He was able to exert a little bit of spatial pressure through the green profound sword just now. Yi Xian gazed at the green profound sword in his hand and sighed with emotion. This green profound sword really is quite terrifying, and it seems like there's no space that it can't control. This chapter isn't over, please continue to the next page. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it, and he continued. After that, Yi Xian cultivated like a madman every single day. In his opinion, this was the best time to cultivate because he had Aunt Ding's protection. Xiong Ho sat cross-legged in a courtyard, and her entire body was covered in flames. Healing. Around 2 hours later, Xiong Ho slowly opened her eyes. At this moment, her injuries were completely healed. Meanwhile, a figure appeared behind Xiong Ho, and it slowly knelt down. "Leader. That goddess is heavily injured, so why don't we just kill her?" Xiong Ho glanced at the figure. "Idiot. Who'll deal with that young brother Yi if we kill her?" The figure hesitated for a moment before it said, "Leader, that young man is as weak as a chicken. Not to mention you, even I can kill him with ease." "Leader, why?" "Shut up." Xiong Ho glanced coldly at the figure. "You idiot. Can't you see that our young brother Yi has backing?" The figure puckered his lips. "Leader is invincible." Xiong Ho shook her head and sighed. "Hurry up and go back. Call your immortal over. I'm so scared with your stupid teammate here." The figure was speechless. After the figure left, Xiong Ho slowly closed her eyes. Actually, she had a headache as well. She'd wanted to do it for a long time. But she'd endured it in the end. Because she couldn't see through the mysterious spacetime, and it was precisely because she couldn't see through it that she had some misgivings. As it turned out, her misgivings were right. She wasn't confident in being able to withstand the mysterious sword light in Miss Ding's hand. A moment later, Xiong Ho stood up and left. A month later, Yi Xian was able to utilize the spacetime pressure of the mysterious spacetime. Now, killing a life soul realm expert was like killing a chicken to him. Moreover, he was able to suppress all spacetime after fusing with the mysterious spacetime, including the 9th, 10th, and even the 11th spacetime. These spacetimes couldn't withstand his mysterious spacetime at all. Even he himself didn't know what level of strength he possessed. On this day, Yi Xian found Xiong-ho. Seeing that Yi Xian had taken the initiative to look for her, Xiong-ho was a little surprised. "Little brother Yi, why are you looking for me?" Yi Xian smiled, "I want to spar with you." Xiong-ho blinked, "Spar with me?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." Xiong-ho shook her head and smiled, "Little brother Yi, I know that your mysterious spacetime is very powerful, but as far as I know, you don't seem to be able to control it. Even if you can control it, you won't be my match. Because your level is too low." Yi Xian smiled, "It's okay, I'm just trying." Xiong-ho nodded, "Then make your move." Yi Xian opened his palm and the azure profound sword appeared in his hand. The next moment, he slashed down with the sword. As the sword slashed down, the spacetime in front of him shattered and annihilated. Xiong-ho narrowed her eyes and punched out. Boom! Yi Xian was blasted into the 10th layer of spacetime. At the same time, the entire 10th layer of spacetime started burning and turned into a hell of fire. However, Xiong-ho was also slashed into the abyss of the 10th layer of spacetime by Yi Xian's sword. However, the abyss of spacetime could not do anything to her. At this moment, Xiong-ho's expression became solemn. However, the corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up into a smile. Just now, he didn't use the spacetime pressure of the mysterious spacetime. That sword was the same as when he threw Xiao Ta. Now, he had a rough idea of his own combat strength. If he used the spacetime pressure of the mysterious spacetime, he could fight with Xiong-ho. End of this chapter. Chapter 1923. Xiong-ho glanced at Yi Xian, her heart incomparably shocked. This youth actually slashed her into the spacetime abyss. One had to know that Yi Xian was merely at the seamless realm, while she was several realms higher than Yi Xian. Mysterious spacetime. Xiong-ho glanced at Yi Xian. She knew that it was the mysterious spacetime power. What kind of spacetime was that? Xiong-ho was getting more and more curious. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Miss Fierce Ho, I'll seek guidance from you another day." With that, he turned around and left. At this time, Xiong-ho suddenly said, "Can you let me feel that mysterious spacetime?" Yi Xian turned to look at Xiong-ho and said with a smile, "There's no other way." Xiong-ho frowned. "Is there no other way?" Yi Xian nodded. "There's no other way." He was not lying. There was only one way to feel the mysterious spacetime, and that was to fuse with Xiao Ta. Of course, he would not allow Xiao Ta to merge with this woman. Xiong-ho licked the sugar-coated haws without saying anything. Yi Xian smiled, "Miss Xiong-ho, can you tell me more about this realm?" Xiong-ho asked, "What realm?" Yi Xian said, "The realm above life spirit." Xiong-ho said, "Above the life soul is the life god, which is also the life providence, life body, and life soul. Once they are all mastered, they will be the life god." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Is there any difference between a life god and a life soul?" Xiong-ho smiled and said, "The first step is to condense a fate matrix, then a life body, and finally a life soul. After all three are successfully condensed, if they can be perfectly fused again, they can reach the life god level. Once you become a life god, it will be very difficult for you to die." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. "Just like how you threw me into the spacetime abyss, the spacetime abyss can no longer hurt me." Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, "Miss Fierce Ho, are you a fate god?" Xiong-ho shook her head and smiled, "I'm a void life realm above life god." Yi Xian frowned. "Ethereal life? What does it have to do with my life?" Xiong-ho laughed. "Up until now, no one has been able to escape the grasp of fate. Aside from eternal life, the ultimate goal of any living being that cultivates is to escape the control of fate. Yi Xian said solemnly, no one can escape the grasp of fate? Xiong Ho nodded. For now, no. Yi Xian was a little curious. Who created these realms? Ferocious Ho was silent. Yi Xian laughed, you don't know either? Xiong Ho said, the creator of the life god realm is Ji Xian, an exalted immortal. Among countless youths, the highest realm was the life spirit realm, and Ji Xian opened up a new realm based on this foundation, which was the life god realm. The so-called life god realm has a special characteristic. First, it's very hard to injure it with normal power. For example, even the terrifying power in the space-time abyss can't hurt a life god realm cultivator. Yi Xian asked again, what about those above life god? Xiong Ho said, Essence Soul Realm. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Essence Soul Realm? Xiong Ho laughed. Yes. As she spoke, she opened her palm, and there was a small golden person in her palm. This small golden person looked exactly like her. Yi Xian was a little curious. What is this? Xiong Ho said, this is the Essence Soul Realm. Those who reach the Essence Soul Realm can cultivate the Essence Soul, and this Essence Soul is equivalent to a second life. Yi Xian frowned slightly. A second life? Xiong Ho nodded and laughed. It's not just a second life. This Essence Soul has many other benefits. You will know when you reach the Essence Soul Realm. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. Yes. Yi Xian said solemnly, you are at the Essence Soul Realm? Xiong Ho laughed. Yes. This Essence Soul Realm was created by a genius who cultivated painstakingly. The Life God Realm had been a bottleneck for nearly 1,000,000 years until the appearance of this painstakingly cultivation. He opened up a new realm based on the Life God Realm, which is the Essence Soul Realm. When she spoke up to this point, she smiled and said, those who established a realm are also called pioneers, and every single one of them is worthy of our respect. Yi Xian was a little curious. What is the highest realm now? Xiong Ho glanced at Yi Xian. What are you asking about? Yi Xian said, I'm curious. Xiong Ho laughed. Above the Essence Soul Realm is life knowledge. This realm has a particularly terrifying feature, and that is they can foresee their own death. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, you can predict your own death? Xiong Ho nodded. This kind of expert is very terrifying because they can foresee danger. Apart from that, some of their methods can also be described as unfathomable. Yi Xian asked again, what about above the life knowledge realm? Xiong Ho smiled and said, for now, the life-knowing realm is the limit. In a faraway place, many life-knowing realm experts are opening up a new realm. Whoever can open up a new realm will have his name spread through the ages. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Xiong Ho said, I've never seen the mysterious space inside your body. Is the person behind you at the life knowledge realm? Yi Xian said with a smile, guess. Xiong Ho curled her lips. In any case, the highest he can go is no higher than the life knowledge realm. Yi Xian laughed and said nothing more. He turned and left. Life knowledge? He knew that Qing-Er's realm was definitely higher than the life knowledge realm. However, he didn't know what realm Qing had reached. From the beginning, no matter how much he improved, he felt that Qing-Er was unfathomable. Realm? Qing had jumped out of the so-called realm. Behind him, Xiong Ho glanced at Yi Xian and frowned. Could he really be at the life knowledge realm? Yi Xian returned to his room and sat cross-legged on the floor. He opened his palm, and the Qingxian sword appeared in his hand. With his current strength, he could fight a primordial soul realm powerhouse. However, he was not confident that he could win. Moreover, primordial spirit experts had 2 lives. After a long silence, Yi Xian tried to get in touch with the mysterious spacetime abyss. After reaching the life god realm, one could ignore the spacetime abyss. A normal spacetime abyss was no threat to a powerhouse like Xiongho, but what about this mysterious spacetime abyss? In the following time, Yi Xian began to get in touch with the mysterious spacetime abyss. His goal now was to understand the spacetime abyss thoroughly. On this day, a middle-aged man arrived above the women's college. Behind him were two old men. The middle-aged man looked down at the women's college and chuckled. Mysterious spacetime. Interesting. The old man on the left of the middle-aged man said in a deep voice, "Sect Master, there's something fishy about this." The middle-aged man was the sect master of the Tendo sect, Mu Tianming. Mu Tianming chuckled. Back then, our Tendo sect and the Azure sect worked together to seal this Xiongho. We used more than a dozen special spacetime to completely seal it. But now, our special spacetime was broken by that young man's mysterious spacetime. This is not simple. The old man said, "As far as I know, the Divine Lady of the Azure sect has already come into contact with this young man. This chapter is not finished, please continue." Mu Tianming said, "She must have failed. That's why she leaked this information to our Tendo sect, hoping that our Tendo sect will be the vanguard." The old man said in a deep voice, "Then will Sect Master be the vanguard?" Mu Tianming smiled. "Depends." With that, he disappeared and reappeared in the women's college. Miss Ding, who was reading a book, raised her head to look at Mu Tianming, and she felt a slight headache. It's only been a few days, yet another enemy has arrived. Mu Tianming sized Miss Ding up, and then he said, "Miss, I'm only here to meet that young man." Miss Ding smiled. "You want the mysterious spacetime within him?" Mu Tianming smiled. "Yes, I want to meet him." Miss Ding thought for a moment and said, "He's cultivating right now." Mu Tianming smiled. He sized up the surroundings and said, "This place is very ordinary, but the Divine Lady and the Divine Quilt returned without accomplishing anything." As he spoke, he gazed at Miss Ding. "I heard that you possess a mysterious sword light." Miss Ding smiled. "Don't tell me you want to experience it." Mu Tianming smiled. "Miss, do you think that sword light can protect all of you?" Miss Ding shook her head. "I have a slight headache." Mu Tianming smiled. "Miss, you're a smart person. You should know that in his hands, that spacetime will only harm him." Meanwhile, Yi Xian appeared by Miss Ding's side. Miss Ding smiled, "I came to look for you." Yi Xian glanced at Mu Tianming, and then he said, "Aunt Ding, you know how difficult it is for me right now, right? There's no lack of enemies no matter where I go." Miss Ding blinked. "Don't you think that all of your enemies are very retarded?" Yi Xian was speechless. The smile on Mu Tianming's face vanished when he heard this. Yi Xian felt quite embarrassed as well. He glanced at Mu Tianming and said, "Aunt Ding, he's still here. You have to give him some face." Miss Ding shook her head. "I don't care. Just play with them yourself." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Don't, Aunt Ding. That fellow's cultivation is much higher than mine." "You." Miss Ding turned around to look at Yi Xian and interrupted Yi Xian, "If you can't even deal with a retard like that, then how can you surpass your father? I believe that you can do it." Yi Xian was speechless. Meanwhile, Mu Tianming suddenly smiled and said, "I'm retarded?" Miss Ding turned around to look at Mu Tianming. "Aren't you?" Mu Tianming shook his head and smiled. "How interesting. How truly interesting. What right does an ant like you have to look down on someone that's 10,000 times stronger than you? Just because you have a mysterious ray of sword light in your hand? Do you think that mysterious ray of sword light can protect you? How many times can you use such a consumable?" "You." Miss Ding suddenly smiled and said, "I'm sorry, but I can use it countless times." As she spoke, she opened her palm, and a ray of sword light suddenly flew out. Hiss. Mu Tianming didn't even have time to react before the ray of sword light pierced through his forehead. Bang! Mu Tianming's body instantly became illusory. Mu Tianming was stunned. He'd been instantly killed. Mu Tianming gazed at Miss Ding. You. Whose sword light is that? Miss Ding smiled, it's my man's. P.S. Do you celebrate the new year? End of this chapter. Chapter 1924. At this moment, Mu Tianming's body was becoming more and more illusory. However, just when he was about to vanish completely, a ray of golden light suddenly flew out and vanished into the horizon. An essence spirit. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. Aunt Ding, that's his essence spirit. He's trying to escape. Aunt Ding smiled, it's fine. It's fine? Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, Mu Tianming's essence spirit was suddenly pierced by a ray of sword light. Hiss. Mu Tianming's essence spirit dissipated. He was completely dead. Miss Ding looked at Yi Xian, come with me. With that, she turned around and left. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before following her. On the other side, Xiong Ho was silent for a moment before she said, how amazing. With that, she turned around and left. Shen Qin withdrew her gaze from the clouds, and her expression was solemn. Mu Tianming had been instantly killed. How could they continue? After a moment of silence, she said, we can't afford to offend that woman. The old man said in a low voice, Divine Daughter, what should we do now? Shen Qin's expression was slightly unsightly. Give up. She was naturally unwilling, but if they didn't give up, how could they deal with that woman? Shen Qin sighed softly. At this moment, the old man suddenly said, Yi Xian can't stay in the academy forever. Shen Qin was slightly stunned, and then she said softly, that's true. As she spoke, she looked at the academy below. That woman had a life-saving sword light, but Yi Xian didn't. If Yi Xian left the academy, then it would be their chance. After a moment of silence, Shen Qin turned to look at the old man. Mu Tianming is dead, and the Tendo sect won't let the matter rest. Keep an eye on their movements. The old man bowed slightly, understood. With that, he turned around and left. Shen Qin looked down at the academy with a slightly unsightly expression. Within the academy, Miss Ding brought Yi Xian to the back of a mountain. She was silent along the way. Yi Xian felt slightly uneasy. Would Aunt Ding feel that he was too comfortable right now and want to find trouble for him? That was quite possible. At this moment, Miss Ding suddenly said, what do you plan to do next? Yi Xian said with a smile, I want to cultivate here. Glancing at Yi Xian, Miss Ding shook her head and smiled. You are taking this place as a safe haven, aren't you? Yi Xian said with a bitter smile, Aunt Ding, are you going to kick me out? Miss Ding laughed and said, I want you to go to a place to do something, are you willing? Miss Ding, I want you to do something. Are you willing? Yi Xian, Miss Ding, what? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then said, what is it? Yi Xian Yi. Yi Xian, Yi. Shua. Miss Ding said solemnly, she's in a bit of trouble right now. I hope that you can help her. Ding, Yi to spirit. Ding. Ding, 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 Miss Ding nodded, yes. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, doesn't Big Sister Shue have a father? Miss Ding smiled and said, your father has gone to a very, very far place. He can't care about this place for the time being. So, I can only let you go. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, since it's Big Sister Shue's problem, then I'll naturally lend a hand. However, Aunt Ding, you also know that my strength is weak. I'm afraid that if I go, not only will I not be able to help Sister Shue, but I will also become a burden to her. Miss Ding laughed and said, you want benefits. Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. If I still want benefits from helping a family, then wouldn't I be worse than an animal? Miss Ding smiled and said, your biggest weakness now is the problem of your realm. As she spoke, she pondered for a moment and said, you are now in the seamless realm. It won't be difficult for you to reach the seamless Tao. Yi Xian quickly said, really? Miss Ding nodded, I'll help you attain the seamless realm. Yi Xian hurriedly said, thank you, Aunt Ding. Miss Ding said, come with me. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Yi Xian hurriedly followed her. It didn't take long for Miss Ding to bring Yi Xian to an expanse of starry sky. She glanced at the surroundings before she gazed at Yi Xian. You can devour sword energy to increase your cultivation, right? Yi Xian nodded. Miss Ding opened her palm, and a strand of sword energy appeared there. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly said, no, no. Aunt Ding, I can't devour my father's sword energy. Miss Ding smiled, why? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, I won't be able to endure it if the level of the sword energy is too high. Miss Ding smiled, it's fine. You can devour it slowly. Yi Xian intended to say something else when the sword energy in Miss Ding's hand suddenly entered his body. Bang! Yi Xian's body trembled violently. In an instant, countless strands of sword energy had actually appeared throughout his body. Yi Xian was horrified, and he hurriedly sat down cross-legged before slowly pressing down with his hands. At this moment, he'd utilized the mysterious space. However, he noticed that the strand of sword energy was actually unable to suppress even the mysterious space. Damn it. My father is quite ferocious. Meanwhile, Miss Ding suddenly said, calm your mind. Yi Xian hurriedly did as he was told, and he gradually noticed that the strand of sword energy within his body was actually dissipating by itself and allowing him to absorb it. Yi Xian instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he sensed this scene. Under normal circumstances, he would absolutely be unable to endure this strand of sword energy from his father. Fortunately, he had Aunt Ding's help. Just like that, with Miss Ding's help, Yi Xian started to devour the strand of sword energy bit by bit, and the aura he emanated gradually grew stronger and stronger. On the other side, Xiong Ho sat cross-legged in her room with her eyes slightly closed. Her entire body was emitting a blood-red flame. After an unknown period of time, Xiong Ho slowly opened her eyes, and the flames around her suddenly surged. However, as she pressed down with her right hand, the flames around her instantly vanished. At this moment, a woman suddenly appeared behind her. The woman bowed respectfully, greetings, Lord Xiong. Xiong Ho said indifferently, how is it? Yu Xian said, Lord Xiong, I've found him. After saying that, she placed a black scroll in front of Xiong Ho. Xiong Ho opened it, and after a long time, she frowned slightly, a woman in a plain dress? Yu Xian nodded, there are two people behind that young Master Yi. One is that woman in a plain dress, and the sword in his hand seems to have been forged by this woman. Apart from this woman in a plain dress, there's also a man in a green shirt. The man in green shirt seems to be young Master Ye's father. Xiong Ho said, do you have detailed information on these two people? Yu Xian shook her head, I can't find them. Yi Xian frowned slightly, you can't find them? Yu Xian nodded, these two people are extremely mysterious. Among them, the woman in the plain dress who appears the most in the eyes of the world is also very mysterious. I only know that she only uses one sword to kill people. Xiong Ho frowned slightly, one sword? Yu Xian nodded slightly, one sword. Xiong Ho's lips curled up slightly, killing people with one sword, interesting. Yu Xian said solemnly, Lord Xiong, this young man's background is extremely mysterious, especially the sword in his hand. It can actually ignore any space-time pressure and space-time abyss. Apart from that, his bloodline is also extremely special. As of now, this subordinate has never seen a bloodline that is more powerful than his. Xiong Ho was silent. Yu Xian said again, Lord Xiong, there's one more thing. This Women's Academy's dean is extremely not simple. We can't underestimate him. Xiong Ho asked, what do you mean? Yu Xian said solemnly, his background is also very mysterious, and he's extremely powerful. As for how strong he is, I haven't found out yet. However, we can't underestimate him. Xiong Ho was silent for a long time, then said, in that case, this little brother Yi has a group of terrifying people behind him. However, logically speaking, with such a powerful background, it shouldn't be unknown. Yu Xian nodded, yes. Xiong Ho laughed, it's getting more and more interesting. Yu Xian retreated to the side and did not speak anymore. After a while, Xiong Ho suddenly laughed, Yu Xian, do you think it's possible that the plain-dressed woman and the green-robed man have surpassed the life-knowing realm? Yu Xian shook her head, absolutely impossible. If the two of them had surpassed the life-knowing realm, they would have long been famous. But the fact is, we haven't even heard of them. Speaking up to here, she paused and said, at most, life-knowing realm. At most, life-knowing realm. That was already a very high estimate. One must know that in this world, life-knowing realm was as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. At this moment, the space in front of Yu Xian suddenly trembled. After a while, Yu Xian looked at Xiong Ho, Lord Xiong, that young Master Yi has come out of seclusion. And now, he has reached the seamless Tao. Xiong Ho frowned slightly, he has reached the seamless Tao. Yu Xian nodded, not only that, but he has also left the Women's Academy. Xiong Ho immediately stood up, he has left the Women's Academy. Yu Xian nodded, yes. Xiong Ho said, follow him in secret. Don't show yourself. With that, she suddenly vanished. As for Yu Xian, she also quietly disappeared. Somewhere in the clouds, an old man appeared behind Shinqin, and the old man said in a low voice, Goddess, I just received news that young Master Yi has left the Women's Academy. Shinqin opened her eyes, he has left the academy? The old man nodded, yes. Shinqin said, did Miss Ding follow him? The old man shook his head, no. Shinqin frowned slightly, he actually didn't follow. Isn't he afraid of death? The old man said, Lord Xiong has also left the Women's Academy. Shinqin said in a low voice, that damned woman can really endure. She actually hasn't made a move yet. The old man hesitated and said, I'm afraid she wants us to make the first move. Shinqin nodded, that woman is extremely vicious. Inform the sect of Tendo that Yi Xian has left the Women's Academy. In any case, she wouldn't make the first move. The old man nodded, understood. With that, he turned and left. Within the Women's Academy, Miss Ding looked up at the strand of sword light that had vanished in the horizon, and she said softly, I've finally sent that troublesome fellow away. Little fellow, take care on your journey. Chapter 1925. Not long after Yi Xian left the women's college, Xiong Ho appeared behind him. Xiong Ho rolled her eyes at Yi Xian, Brother Yi, why didn't you inform me when you were leaving? That's not good enough. Yi Xian smiled, Miss Xiong Ho, you really want to rely on me. Xiong Ho giggled, I like to follow you. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, Miss Xiong Ho, I have a suggestion. Xiong Ho glanced at Yi Xian, what suggestion? Yi Xian said seriously, your main target is my mysterious spacetime. You don't want to be my enemy. Am I right? Xiong Ho nodded, yes. But you are not willing to give it to me. Yi Xian said with a smile, we can cooperate. Xiong Ho frowned, cooperation? Yi Xian nodded, cooperation. Xiong Ho said solemnly, how? Yi Xian smiled, I will share the mysterious time and space with you, and you will give me benefits. Xiong Ho looked at Yi Xian, what benefits? Yi Xian shrugged, I don't care, it depends on what you give me. Xiong Ho smiled, you are so cunning. Yi Xian smiled, Miss Xiong Ho, what do you think of my suggestion? Xiong-ho was silent for a moment. What do you want? Yi Xian asked, what can you give me? Xiong-ho said, I can give you a lot of women. Yi Xian said subconsciously, how many? Speaking of this, he seemed to think of something and flew into a rage. Miss Xiong-ho, please don't insult my character. I, Yi Xian, am not interested in women. Xiong-ho curled her lips, I don't believe you. Yi Xian, Xiong-ho said, I also have a suggestion, listen to it. Your mysterious spacetime is very precious, and I don't have any divine items of equal value to exchange with you. So, what I mean is, you lend it to me for research, and I will help you fight and help you advance to the life-soul realm, or even the life-god realm. Of course, it is also possible to advance to the primordial soul realm. After all, your talent is extremely good, the best I've ever seen. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. You're really good at bluffing. After speaking, he increased his speed and disappeared into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Xiong-ho hurriedly followed. Xiong-ho walked to Yi Xian, then you can tell me your conditions. Yi Xian smiled and said, Miss Xiong-ho, do you know about the extreme heaven realm? Xiong-ho frowned slightly, are you going to the ultimate heaven realm? Yi Xian nodded. Xiong-ho's expression became a little strange. Yi Xian asked, what's wrong? Xiong-ho said in a low voice, do you know what that place is? Yi Xian shook his head, I don't know. Xiong-ho shook her head, I advise you not to go. Yi Xian was puzzled, why? Xiong-ho said calmly, it's a very chaotic place. How chaotic is it? Let me put it this way, you will see the darkest side of human nature there. Moreover, there are a lot of powerhouses there because there are divine crystals there, a kind of divine item that can make people reach the knowing realm after swallowing it. Of course, it requires a lot, so some top powerhouses struggle there every day, trying to save enough divine crystals to reach the knowing realm. Yi Xian was speechless. Why did Sister Shui go there? Xiong-ho licked her candied fruit and said, with your current strength, going there, saying that, she shook her head. Yi Xian was speechless. Xiong-ho continued, moreover, you have a bunch of divine items, whether it is your sword, your tower, or the mysterious spacetime, they all have a fatal attraction to the monsters there. If you go there, you will be like a sheep entering a pack of wolves. Saying that, she seemed to think of something and frowned, why do you dare to go there? Yi Xian smiled bitterly, my sister seems to be in trouble there. Xiong-ho glanced at Yi Xian, I think you are not going to save people, but to die. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Miss Xiong-ho, with your strength, can you beat everyone there? Xiong-ho blinked, of course. Yi Xian glanced at Xiong-ho, a little doubtful, is it true? Xiong-ho was a little dissatisfied, you think I am not strong? Yi Xian was silent and did not speak again. Xiong-ho smiled slightly and did not speak again. She wanted Yi Xian to ask for her help first, so that she could take the initiative. However, she did not expect that Yi Xian did not speak. Yi Xian was a little speechless, really speechless. Before coming out, Aunt Ding told him that the extreme heaven realm was very safe, and there was not much danger. On the other side, Shen Qin looked at Yi Xian and Xiong-ho in the distance and frowned, is this guy going to the extreme heaven realm? The extreme heaven realm. That was not an ordinary place. Even experts at her level and Xiong-ho's level could not be said to be absolutely safe there. As for Yi Xian, why would this guy dare to go there? Without thinking too much, she still followed. 2 hours later, Yi Xian arrived at the extreme heaven realm. As soon as he entered the extreme heaven realm, Yi Xian frowned because he smelled a pungent smell of blood. Beside Yi Xian, Xiong-ho pointed into the distance, do you see that city? Yi Xian looked into the distance and saw a big city standing in the starry sky. However, this city was a little strange, and there was a constant evil aura and blood aura drifting in the city. With one look, one could tell that this was not a good place. Xiong-ho glanced at Yi Xian, you can still make it if you leave now. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Why should I leave?" After saying that, he walked into the distance. After a moment of silence, Xiong Ho followed. Yi Xian arrived in front of the city gate. When he arrived at the city gate, his expression gradually became solemn. This city was actually dark red in color. Upon closer inspection, it was blood. This city was actually dyed red with blood. The whole city was incomparably gloomy. Beside Yi Xian, Xiong Ho smiled and said, "Young Master Yi, I still have something to do, so I will take my leave now." After saying that, she turned and disappeared. Seeing this, Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. Damn it, this woman definitely did it on purpose. Now came the problem. Should he go in or not? Yi Xian glanced at the city, and without thinking much, he walked in. As soon as he entered the city, more than 10 divine senses swept over. Each divine sense was at least at the life god realm. Sensing this scene, Yi Xian felt a headache. No matter how much his strength increased, his enemies would always be much stronger than him. When could he be like Qing? If he encountered an enemy, he would ask, "Where is your home?" It would be difficult. Yi Xian sighed in his heart. Now, the most important thing was to find Sister Xue and leave with her. At this moment, a bloody head suddenly fell in front of Yi Xian. The head was still bleeding, and obviously, it had just fallen off the neck. Yi Xian was speechless. Was it really that violent? At this moment, a woman suddenly walked from the street in the distance. The woman held a sword in her hand, and there was a trace of blood on the tip of the sword. Obviously, she was the one who chopped off the head. The woman wore a tight black robe, the robe tightly wrapped around her graceful body. It was extremely hot and alluring, and her appearance was also extremely beautiful, but it was extremely cold. Her eyes were like 10,000-year-old ice, without a trace of emotion. Yi Xian glanced at the sword in the woman's hand and didn't speak. The woman walked over to Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian as she opened her palm. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he took out a candied fruit and gave it to the woman. The woman stared at Yi Xian and didn't speak. At this moment, the head in front of him suddenly trembled, and then a spatial ring floated out from the head and fell firmly into the woman's hand. Yi Xian was slightly embarrassed. So, she didn't want something from me, so he hurriedly put the candied fruit away. At this moment, there were still over a dozen divine senses on him. After the woman put the spatial ring away, she glanced at Yi Xian, and then she walked over to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was about to speak, but the woman suddenly drew her sword, and it swept across Yi Xian's throat. She withdrew her sword. She turned around and left. Her movements were as smooth as flowing water. However, she suddenly stopped after taking a few steps, and she turned around to look at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was completely fine, and there was no mark on his throat at all. The woman frowned slightly when she saw this. Xiong Ho frowned in the dark. How is this possible? The swordsman woman was a life god, and she was a swordsman. Her combat strength far surpassed ordinary life gods, and she hadn't held back in that attack, but Yi Xian was completely fine. It was too strange. It wasn't just Xiong Ho, even some experts in the dark were puzzled. On the street, Yi Xian rubbed his throat lightly, and then he looked at the swordsman woman and smiled. That's it? The woman gazed at Yi Xian in silence for a moment, and then she suddenly charged forward. A ray of sword light flashed, and she was already behind Yi Xian when the ray of light vanished, and a sword was stuck between Yi Xian's brows. The sword was swift. Right at this moment, the woman suddenly frowned, and she turned around to look at Yi Xian. At this moment, the sword stuck between Yi Xian's brows was gradually vanishing, but Yi Xian was completely fine. The woman stared fixedly at Yi Xian as if she was trying to see through Yi Xian. At this moment, the entire street was deathly silent. All the experts in the dark were dumbfounded. Xiong Ho's face was filled with disbelief. He's actually fine? He's fine after being stabbed in the head? Is this guy the reincarnation of the sword god? On the street in the distance, Yi Xian had completely absorbed the sword in the woman's hand. His body trembled, and after a moment, he greedily breathed in. This feels so good. Behind Yi Xian, the swordsman looked at Yi Xian with a trace of fear in her eyes. The first strike was just a casual one, and Yi Xian was fine. She thought that Yi Xian had used some secret technique to evade her sword, and the second strike was her full strength. She did not hold back at all. Most importantly, the guy in front of her did not dodge, nor did he use any secret technique. He took her sword head-on. How did he do it? Thinking of this, the fear in the woman's eyes increased a little. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at the swordsman. He looked at the swordsman and smiled. Since I reached destiny knowledge, no one has attacked me for 1,000,000 years. Little girl, you're the first. Destiny knowledge state. As soon as he said this, the scene instantly became silent, and the divine senses on Yi Xian's body instantly retreated like the tide. The swordsman's expression froze, and her hands began to tremble. In the dark, Xiong Ho's eyes were wide open, and she did not even lick the candied hawthorn. Chapter 1926. Destiny Realm? The moment Yi Xian said that, the experts in the dark were dumbfounded. What kind of existence was the Destiny Realm? It was the strongest expert in the world. Moreover, these Destiny Realm experts were extremely rare, even in the Extreme Heaven Realm. This was because the Extreme Heaven Realm was a group of people who wanted to reach the Destiny Realm. But now, there was a Destiny Realm expert here? But didn't this guy just reach the seamless path? Was he pretending to be weak? Opposite Yi Xian, the female swordsman's expression was extremely ugly. Did I really meet a Destiny Realm expert? At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm and a portrait appeared in his hand. It was Sister Shue's portrait. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Do you recognize this person? The woman looked at the portrait and hesitated for a while before saying, Senior, are you here for her? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The woman said in a deep voice, this woman has escaped to the dark forest. Dark forest? Yi Xian frowned. Where is the dark forest? The woman pointed to a distance. 1,000 miles away from the city. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. After saying that, he turned around and left. At this moment, the woman suddenly said, You're not going to kill me? Yi Xian turned around and looked at the woman. I never kill women. After saying that, he turned around and left. The woman looked at Yi Xian and heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stopped in his tracks. The woman's expression suddenly changed. This guy wouldn't go back on his words, right? Yi Xian looked at the woman. I'm not familiar with this place. Come with me. I'll give you some pointers on Sword Dao. The woman looked at Yi Xian. She hesitated for a while before saying, Senior. Yi Xian frowned. Why? You're not willing? The woman quickly said, I'm willing. Yi Xian nodded. Follow me. The woman glanced at Yi Xian and then followed him. Along the way, the woman did not dare to speak. She was already traumatized by those two swords just now. In the dark, some of the experts didn't dare to follow Yi Xian anymore. Regardless of whether this young man was in the life-knowing state or not, he was definitely not someone they could provoke. After walking for a short while, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. Not far in front of him, a man was standing there with a knife in his hand. Next to him was a bloody corpse. The corpse was still bleeding from its throat. Obviously, it had just been killed. At this moment, the man suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian and the woman. When he saw Yi Xian, he frowned. Seamless Dao. As he spoke, the corners of his mouth curled up into a strange smile. Yi Xian smiled and turned to the woman. Kill her. The woman was stunned. You're not going to kill him, but you want me to? Yi Xian looked at the woman. What? Is there a problem? The woman hesitated for a moment before she said, "All right." She suddenly vanished on the spot as she spoke, and then a ray of light flashed. The man frowned slightly. "Shuang, what's wrong with you?" As he spoke, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Bang! An expanse of light erupted from the sword and blade, and then both of them retreated explosively. The woman called Shuang was about to attack again. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Come, try using the sword I forged." As he spoke, he opened his palm, and the azure sword flew over to Shuang. Shuang glanced at Yi Xian, and then she held the sword in her hand. She didn't think too much about it before she vanished on the spot. A wisp of ferocity flashed through the man's eyes. "Have you gone mad?" As he spoke, he slashed down with his sword. Bang! An expanse of light suddenly shattered, and the man retreated explosively. This chapter isn't over. Please continue. As he retreated, his body instantly shattered. It wasn't just his body, even his soul had instantly become ethereal as if it had become transparent. Shuang was stunned. As if she'd thought of something, she looked down at the azure sword in her hand, her face filled with disbelief. She'd killed this guy with a single slash? After all, this man's strength was on par with hers. They'd fought each other in the past, but neither of them could do anything to the other. Yet, she'd killed this guy with a single slash just now. It was because of the sword. Shuang looked at the sword in her hand, her heart filled with shock. At the same time, she became slightly fearful of Yi Xian. In the distance, the man was completely stunned as well. He looked at Shuang in disbelief. Shuang didn't speak. She turned and walked over to Yi Xian, returning the sword to Yi Xian. "Senior," Yi Xian put the azure sword away, and then glanced at the man. "Everything on him belongs to you." As he spoke, he walked off into the distance. Shuang hesitated for a moment before following him. At that moment, the man who was about to disappear suddenly asked, "Who is he?" Shuang glanced at the man. "This senior is at the life-knowing state." "You idiot." With that, she hurriedly followed Yi Xian. Life-knowing state. The man was petrified. He'd actually attacked a life-knowing state boss just now. Soon, the man completely disappeared. In the dark, Xiong Ho was silent. That sword was too terrifying. Especially in the hands of a swordsman at Shuang's level, the increase in combat strength would be too terrifying. Xiong Ho was slightly displeased because the plot was a little different from what she'd imagined. Originally, she'd thought that this guy wouldn't even be able to survive for 15 minutes after leaving with her, and then he'd ask her for help. However, she hadn't expected that this guy would actually pretend to be a life-knowing state expert. Moreover, he'd even found a bodyguard. Most importantly, that swordsman actually believed that he was at the life-knowing state. This world was too crazy. After a moment, Xiong Ho looked into the distance and said, "Let's see how long you can pretend for." In the distance, after Shuang caught up to Yi Xian, she was even more respectful towards Yi Xian. This was really a boss. If she had that sword from before, then she was even confident in her ability to kill an origin spirit realm expert. Meanwhile, Yi Xian spoke abruptly, "Miss Shuang, why are the people here pursuing the person I'm looking for?" Shuang was stunned. "Senior, you don't know?" Yi Xian shook his head. Shuang spoke solemnly, "I thought you were doing it for the Heaven Supreme crystal mine in her possession." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "A Heaven Supreme crystal mine?" Shuang nodded. "A Heaven Supreme crystal mine appeared on Skypillar mountain range, and many people fought for it. Unfortunately, it fell into that young lady's hands in the end. Those people naturally wouldn't let it go, so they joined forces against her. In the end, she had no choice but to flee into Dark Forest." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Is Dark Forest very dangerous?" Shuang glanced at Yi Xian. "It's naturally not dangerous to you, senior. But it's extraordinarily dangerous to us." As she spoke, she hesitated for a moment and said, "Senior, are you here to help that young lady? Yi Xian smiled, I'll see. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Xu Wang glanced at Yi Xian once more, and then he hurriedly followed after Yi Xian. All along the way, no one came out to look for trouble with Yi Xian again. Obviously, the death of the man from before had deterred the experts in the dark. On the other hand, Yi Xian was growing more and more arrogant as he walked. He had no choice but to act arrogantly right now. He had to act well, otherwise, he would become an idiot. More and more people appeared in the dark. However, none of them dared to get close to Yi Xian, nor did they dare to sweep Yi Xian with their divine sense. Obviously, they were afraid of Yi Xian. Please continue to the next page if this chapter isn't finished. Destiny Realm. Who wouldn't panic? Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings with a faint smile on his face, and he seemed calm and composed. Xu Wang followed slowly behind him with a respectful expression on his face. As they were about to leave the city, Yi Xian stopped in his tracks. In front of the city gate stood an old man. The old man wore a long black robe, and his hands were hidden in his sleeves. His expression was cold and gloomy. Beside Yi Xian, Xu Wang said in a low voice, Old man Xuanji is a big shot in the city. Primordial Spirit Realm. Big shot? Yi Xian smiled and looked at Old man Xuanji. What's the matter? Old man Xuanji looked at Yi Xian. Are you a Destiny Realm expert? Yi Xian asked in return, do you have a problem with that? His tone was unfriendly. Old man Xuanji said, I wouldn't dare. Before old man Xuanji could finish speaking, Yi Xian suddenly walked slowly towards old man Xuanji. I usually do not make a move, but if I do, it will not just be 1 or 2 deaths. I am afraid that if I make a move, an entire universe will be gone. Su Wang. End of this chapter. Chapter 1927. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Xu Wang's expression became even more respectful. She was now convinced that Yi Xian was at the destiny-knowing stage. Even old man Profound Secrets had bowed to him, so how could it be fake? When the two disappeared into the distance, Xiong Ho appeared in front of the city gates. Not only her, but goddess Shenqin also appeared beside her. Xiong Ho glanced at Shenqin, smiled, and said nothing. Shenqin was expressionless. You're just going to let him keep pretending? Xiong Ho hurriedly said, if you can't stand it, then go and deal with him. Shenqin was silent. She wanted to deal with Yi Xian, but she was also wary. This guy was not a kind soul. Xiong Ho smiled. It's fine, let him keep pretending. Let's see how long he can keep pretending. Shenqin turned to look behind her, expressionless. A bunch of fools. With that, she turned and left. Xiong Ho shook her head. Actually, if she did not know about Yi Xian's background, she might have been fooled too. Yi Xian's azure profound sword and that mysterious space-time really exceeded the understanding of primordial spirit realm powerhouses. It was also because of this that Yi Xian could fool old man Profound Secrets. But what puzzled her was why Yi Xian was fine after taking 2 of Xu Wang's swords head-on. How did he do it? Xiong Ho was puzzled. Under Xu Wang's guidance, Yi Xian arrived at the dark forest. Standing in front of the forest, Yi Xian fell silent. He finally knew why this place was called the Dark Forest. Because it was really dark. The forest stretched as far as the eye could see, and all the trees were pitch black, as if they had been splashed with ink. Yi Xian turned to look at Xu Wang. Is there anything special about this dark forest? Xu Wang nodded. This place is very dangerous because there are spirits of darkness inside, an extremely special kind of being. This dark forest is their territory, and they do not welcome other beings. Yi Xian looked at the dark forest in silence. He wanted to go in, but he knew that once he did, he would probably be in big trouble. Beside him, Su Wang saw that Yi Xian was silent and did not say anything. After a short while, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Miss Hypocrisy, is there a king in this dark forest?" Xu Wang nodded. "The King of Darkness is the ruler of the dark forest." Yi Xian nodded. "Understood." As he spoke, he asked again, "Who are these people who are chasing after the woman I'm looking for?" Xu Wang spoke in a low voice, "The most important ones are King Martial Spirit and Zhao Shenshao. Both of them are peak soul formation realm experts. Besides the two of them, there are many other mysterious experts. All of them want to obtain the sky split or in that woman's possession." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." With that, he walked towards the dark forest. Seeing this, Xu Wang hesitated for a moment before he followed. With this senior around, what was there to be afraid of? King of Darkness? In front of a destiny-knowing expert, he was like a little brother. After they stepped foot into the dark forest, Yi Xian frowned because it was extraordinarily cold and gloomy here. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly passed the green profound sword to Xu Wang. "Kill anyone that doesn't know what's good for them." Xu Wang hurriedly nodded, and then he received the green profound sword. At the moment she held it in her hand, her bearing had changed completely. Even though she was only at the life god realm, she felt like she was invincible right now. This sword had improved her strength by more than 10 times at the very least. Right at this moment, a black tree in the distance suddenly started wriggling, and then a black figure gradually appeared before them. The figure was completely pitch black, and only its eyes emanated a ghastly blue glow. Xu Wang spoke in a low voice by Yi Xian's side, "The spirit of darkness, should we kill him?" Yi Xian turned around to glance at Xu Wang, and then he said, "We have to convince him with virtue first, and we'll kill him if he's not convinced." Xu Wang nodded, "I understand." Yi Xian gazed at the spirit of darkness, "I want to see your king." The spirit of darkness ridiculed, "See our king? Are you even worthy?" Yi Xian turned around to look at Xu Wang, "You can kill him now." Xu Wang directly vanished on the spot. Hiss. The spirit of darkness didn't even have the chance to react before it was wiped out. After he stopped, Xu Wang looked at the green profound sword in his hand, and he was slightly excited. This feeling was simply too awesome. It could be said that he was invincible amongst those of the same realm with this sword. Yi Xian glanced into the distance, and he laughed, "King of Darkness, you sure are arrogant." His voice was like thunder, and the surrounding tree of darkness trembled violently. However, there was no response. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he took a step forward before he said, "King of Darkness, if you don't come out in 10 breaths of time, then I'll flatten your dark forest." Xu Wang's blood started to boil slightly when he heard Yi Xian's words. How domineering. Following a big shot is so awesome. However, there was still no response. Breath after breath passed, Yi Xian frowned slightly. Damn it. Is this fellow really not going to come out? If he doesn't come out, then would I really have to destroy the dark forest? With my current strength, it's quite difficult to flatten the dark forest. Right when 10 breaths of time were about to end, a powerful pressure suddenly appeared here. It's here. Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. At this moment, a middle-aged man appeared not far away from Yi Xian and Xu Wang. The middle-aged man was dressed a little strangely. His hair was standing up like a broom. Not only that, but his clothes were also made of leaves. He looked like a tree ant. Xu Wang, who stood by Yi Xian's side, spoke in a low voice, "King of Darkness." King of Darkness glanced at Yi Xian, and then he said, "I heard a life knower realm expert has arrived in the city. Is that you?" Yi Xian smiled, "This isn't a suitable place to talk. Let's go somewhere else." King of Darkness frowned slightly, "Somewhere else?" Yi Xian nodded, "Come with me." As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and Xiao Ta appeared within it. After that, he brought Xu Wang along with him and entered Xiao Ta. King of Darkness hesitated for a moment, and then he entered Xiao Ta as well. When they entered Xiao Ta, King of Darkness and Xu Wang's expressions instantly changed. King of Darkness glanced at the surroundings, and he felt slight disbelief. The space here is actually completely different from the outside world. Moreover, the flow of time. As he spoke up to this point, he started to speak incoherently. Because this had exceeded his understanding. King of Darkness looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. This is a special space that I created. It's usually used by my juniors to cultivate. King of Darkness hesitated for a moment, and then he said, I admire senior's ability. Yi Xian frowned slightly. You don't know? King of Darkness was slightly embarrassed. I'm only at the nascent soul realm, and I haven't come into contact with such a divine ability. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Right. But it's fine, we can take it slowly. King of Darkness hurriedly said, Senior, you're right. Yi Xian made an inviting gesture. Please take a seat. King of Darkness was slightly overwhelmed by the unexpected favor, and he hurriedly said, Senior, please. Smiling, Yi Xian said, Let's sit together. As soon as he finished speaking, he sat down. King of Darkness didn't sit, and he stood instead. Yi Xian gazed at King of Darkness, and King of Darkness hurriedly said, I like to stand. Yi Xian smiled. What's your name? King of Darkness replied, Mu Senior. Yi Xian nodded. Mu Senator. I came to Dark Forest this time to look for someone. As he spoke, he opened his palm, and Sister Shue's portrait appeared in his hand. You should have seen her, right? Mu Sun was slightly stunned when he saw Sister Shue's portrait. It's her. Yi Xian asked, Do you know her? Mu Sun nodded. I have. She came to Dark Forest a month ago, and 2 people were chasing after her. Yi Xian gazed at Mu Sun. You didn't do anything to her, right? Mu Sun hurriedly said, No. After she entered Dark Forest, I didn't make things difficult for her. On the contrary, I made her leave. Yi Xian frowned. She left? Mu Sun nodded. She went to the wasteland. Yi Xian felt a headache coming on, and he turned to look at Su Wang. Su Wang spoke in a low voice. I'm not familiar with the wasteland, and I've only heard of it. As she spoke, she gazed at Mu Sun. You should be more familiar with the King of Darkness. Mu Sun spoke in a low voice. The wasteland is slightly special. It's the territory of the wasteland god, and he has an extremely strange temper. He's not easy to get along with. Yi Xian felt a headache coming on. Do I have to go to the wasteland to act cool again? He might seem fearless now, but he was actually panicking deep down. Meanwhile, Mu Sun spoke abruptly. Senior, I'm willing to take you to the wasteland. Yi Xian gazed at Mu Sun. Won't that be troublesome for you? Mu Sun grinned. It's my honor to be able to serve Senior. Yi Xian smiled. Then I'll be troubling you. As soon as he finished speaking, he led Mu Sun and Su Wang away from Xiao Ta. After leaving Xiao Ta, Mu Sun sighed with emotion. The space-time in Xiao Ta's world was really different from the space-time in reality. As if he'd thought of something, Mu Sun gazed at Yi Xian. Senior, what's the difference between the space-time in Xiao Ta's world and the space-time in the outside world? Yi Xian smiled. 10 years in there is equivalent to a day in the outside world. Mu Sun and Su Wang were dumbstruck when they heard this. 10 years in there is equivalent to a day in the outside world? At this moment, tempestuous waves were surging through their hearts. Even the word, heaven-defying, wasn't enough to describe such a divine treasure. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly asked, Is it very difficult? Mu Sun laughed bitterly. It's far more than difficult. Perhaps it's very simple for Senior, but it's as difficult as ascending the heavens for us. Especially the space-time in Xiao Ta's world. I've lived for so long and studied space-time for so long, but I've never seen or heard of such a space-time. Yi Xian smiled. Actually, it's not that difficult. It's just that both of you haven't come into contact with it. When he spoke up to this point, he paused for a moment before he continued. Actually, attaining the destiny realm isn't that difficult. As he spoke up to this point, he didn't continue. If he did, then his act of acting tough would be exposed. Mu Sen's expression changed drastically when he saw this. He bowed respectfully to Yi Xian and said, "Please guide me, senior. If you're able to provide me with some guidance, then I'll never forget your kindness." Yi Xian fell silent. "How the fuck should I guide you? P.S. Because it's New Year, I've been going around to pay my respects, so I didn't have time to write. So, the explosion on the 15th will be delayed. Everyone, please forgive me. Because I really have to pay my respects everywhere. Everyone who's home understands." Chapter 1928. Instruction. Xu Wang also looked at Yi Xian with excitement. Instruction from a life-knowing realm big shot. This was a rare opportunity that only appeared once in 10,000 years. While Xu Wang and Mu Sen were waiting expectantly, Yi Xian smiled. "Then let's talk about the space-time Tao." Mu Sen hurriedly said, "Please instruct us, senior." Yi Xian looked at Mu Sen and smiled. "I'll just talk about it casually. You two listen as you please. How much you can comprehend will depend on yourselves." As he spoke, he opened his palm and pressed it down lightly. In an instant, a mysterious spacetime enveloped Mu Sen and Xu Wang. Mu Sen and Xu Wang's expressions changed when they were enveloped by the mysterious spacetime. This was a spacetime that they had never come into contact with before. Yi Xian smiled. "Do you know what spacetime this is?" Mu Sen and Xu Wang shook their heads. Yi Xian thought to himself, "Actually, I don't know either." Of course, he couldn't say that. He smiled and said, "This is called the Azure Spacetime, a brand new spacetime that I created myself." Mu Sen was shocked. "You created it, senior?" Yi Xian nodded. "Of course." Mu Sen bowed slightly. Senior's methods are truly mysterious. Xu Wang was in awe as well, and he admired Yi Xian even more. Yi Xian said with a smile, "Since you are so smart, I won't say anything more. Feel it yourselves. I believe you'll gain a lot." Both of them closed their eyes slowly and sensed Yi Xian's mysterious spacetime. Yi Xian looked at them and heaved a sigh of relief. "Damn it. I'm going to walk the path of acting cool to the end. Not only must I act cool, I must act well." Xiong Ho and Shen Qin looked into the distance, and their expressions were not good. They realized that Mu Sen was actually very respectful to Yi Xian. Obviously, Mu Sen had been tricked by Yi Xian as well. Shen Qin said in a low voice, "This guy is too good at tricking." Xiong Ho was silent. She was also a little speechless. She had never seen someone so good at bluffing. Meanwhile, Shen Qin spoke in a low voice, "The King of Darkness is an idiot as well." He actually believed that this guy was in the life-knowing state. "That's too stupid." Xiong Ho glanced at the divine quilt. "I think you are the idiot." Shen Qin looked at Xiong Ho with an unfriendly expression. Xiong Ho said, "It's not that Old Man Profound and the King of Darkness are stupid, it's that he has that divine sword and that mysterious spacetime. Not to mention them, even you and I might be intimidated by him if we don't know his background." The divine quilt fell silent. Xiong Ho continued, "Of course, this guy is also good at bluffing, and he's also very bold. To be honest, I do admire him a little." Shen Qin glanced at Xiong Ho and sneered, "Admire him? Are you impressed by his ability to fool people?" Xiong Ho licked her sugar-coated haws, and then she said, "Shen Qin, if you were in the same realm of cultivation as him, then with the level of intelligence you possess, you would probably be completely toyed with by him." Shen Ho was expressionless. "You and him are jackals of the same tribe." Xiong Ho laughed, "You're just a hypocrite." Shen Qin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Let's fight?" Xiong Ho shrugged, "Bring it on." In next to no time, the two of them started fighting. On the other side, Yi Xian slowly withdrew his right hand, and the mysterious spacetime vanished. After a long time, Mu Sen's eyes slowly opened, and he said softly, "The Tao of spacetime has no end." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian and bowed slightly, "Thank you, Senior, for sharing this spacetime. I've gained a lot. Yi Xian smiled, it's no big deal. Mu Sen shook his head, it's a small matter to Senior, but it's a huge matter to me. No matter what, I, Mu Sen, will never forget Junior's guidance today. Yi Xian smiled, then I might have to trouble you to take me to that woman I'm looking for. Mu Sen hurriedly said, of course. Yi Xian said, let's go. Mu Sen hurriedly led the way. It didn't take long for the three of them to leave the dark forest. All along the way, Mu Sen and Xu Wang were extremely respectful to Yi Xian. Now, they firmly believed that Yi Xian was at the destiny-knowing state. It didn't take long for the three of them to arrive at the wasteland. Yi Xian looked up, and he couldn't see the end of the boundless wasteland. Moreover, dark gray sand drifted through the sky. Occasionally, violent winds would whistle by, and the sand would instantly cover the entire sky. Mu Sen spoke in a low voice, Senior, the wasteland is up ahead, the territory of the wasteland god. Yi Xian nodded slightly, ask him to come out. Mu Sen hesitated for a moment before he said, Senior, the wasteland god has a bad temper, so he might. Yi Xian suddenly smiled, if he doesn't cooperate, then just kill him. Mu Sen's expression changed slightly. He'd almost forgotten that this was a big shot at the destiny-knowing state. Mu Sen didn't think too much about it, and he looked up into the sky and said, Wasteland God, come out and meet me. There was no response. Mu Sen frowned when he saw this. Mu Sen added, Wasteland God. His voice rumbled like thunder, and it caused the entire wasteland to tremble violently. Suddenly, a furious shout resounded from afar, which bastard dares to bark in my wasteland? Mu Sen's face instantly darkened when he heard this. Yi Xian gazed at Mu Sen, get him. Mu Sen was slightly hesitant. Yi Xian smiled, what are you afraid of when I'm here? Mu Sen smiled, since Senior has said that, then let's get him. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly charged forward. Bang! In an instant, the sky in the distance dimmed down, and then a powerful force swept through the wasteland like a tide. Suddenly, a furious shout resounded from the depths of the wasteland, Mu Sen, have you gone mad? Rumble. The wasteland in the distance suddenly exploded apart, and then a spatial abyss appeared. Mu Sen and the wasteland god stood facing each other within the spatial abyss. The wasteland god stared fixedly at Mu Sen, we've always minded our own business. What's gotten into you today? Mu Sen spoke coldly, I can't stand the sight of you, alright? As he spoke, he smashed his fist forward. Bang! The space where the wasteland god resided was instantly transformed into a spatial vortex. A wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through the wasteland god's eyes, and then he charged forward while a powerful force shot out explosively. Rumble. Countless strands of space shattered in the distant sky, and then strands of powerful force surged incessantly towards the surroundings. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene. Because the aftershock of the powerful force was surging towards him. Run? How embarrassing would it be to run? I can only go head-on against it. Yi Xian took a step forward and activated his sword domain. Invincible sword domain. Bang! The space around Yi Xian and Su Wang were instantly obliterated. On the other hand, Yi Xian and Su Wang were completely unscathed. Su Wang gazed at Yi Xian with shock in his heart. As expected of a Destiny Realm expert, he was actually able to remain unmoving under such circumstances. Moreover, that sword domain from before was extremely profound, and it was obvious that it wasn't an ordinary sword domain. He's really a big shot. Yi Xian's face was extremely pale as he stood before Su Wang. Actually, if he were to attack, then the aftershock of the force wouldn't have been sufficient to cause him such internal injuries. However, he couldn't attack. He would definitely be exposed once he attacked. Regardless of whether it was Su Wang or Mu Sen, both of them weren't ordinary figures. So, he could only resist them head-on. Fortunately, he was able to resist them even if he didn't attack. This allowed him to have a rough understanding of his own strength. His true combat strength was still a distance away from these soul formation realm experts, but it wasn't a huge gap. After all, he was able to utilize the spatial pressure of that mysterious space. Right at this moment, Mu-Sen and the Wasteland God suddenly stopped moving. The Wasteland God stared fixedly at Mu-Sen. "Mu-Sen, have you gone mad?" Mu-Sen spoke furiously, "I just can't stand the sight of you." The Wasteland God frowned slightly as if he'd thought of something, and then he turned around to look at Yi Xian and Su Wang. His frown deepened when he saw Yi Xian, the seamless path. As he spoke, he gazed at Mu-Sen. "Why did you bring an ant here?" Mu-Sen's expression changed drastically when he heard this. "You're the ant. Your entire family is filled with ants." The Wasteland God frowned. "What's wrong with you?" Mu-Sen stared fixedly at the Wasteland God. "This is Senior Yi Xian. You actually dare to call him an ant? Wasteland God, have you lived for too long?" "Senior?" The Wasteland God spoke in a low voice. "Mu-Sen, is there something wrong with your brain? You actually called an ant from the seamless path Senior?" Mu-Sen glanced coldly at the Wasteland God. "You really are an idiot." The Wasteland God spoke in a low voice. "Mu-Sen, what exactly is wrong with you?" Mu-Sen was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly turned around to look at Su Wang. "Kill him." Su Wang was stunned, and then he drew his sword. Hiss. A strand of sword energy tore through the surroundings. A wisp of viciousness flashed through the Wasteland God's eyes. "A mere life god realm cultivator dares to attack me? You're courting death." As he spoke, he suddenly took a step forward and smashed his fist forward. Bang! An expanse of sword energy was blasted apart while the Wasteland God was pushed over 3 kilometers back. When he finally stopped moving, his entire right arm had been split into 2. The Wasteland God was stunned by this scene. "My arm was split apart by a single strike from an ant at the Life God realm?" It wasn't just the Wasteland God, even Mu-Sen was quite shocked. Su Wang's combat strength actually became so terrifying after he obtained this senior sword. Even though Su Wang was pushed back as well, her eyes were filled with excitement. She was confident in her ability to kill a nascent soul realm expert right now. The boost from the sword in his hand was simply too terrifying. Su Wang was about to attack again, but Yi Xian suddenly said, "Stand down for now." Hearing Yi Xian's words, Wang Ke did not hesitate at all. He turned around and turned into a beam of sword light that landed behind Yi Xian. The Wilderness God frowned slightly at the sight of this, and he gazed at Yi Xian. "Who are you?" At this moment, he also realized that Yi Xian was not simple. Yi Xian smiled and looked at Mu Senior. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" Mu-Sen was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "Wasteland God, this is Senior Yi Xian, a fate knower." Fate-knowing state? The Wilderness God was stunned when he heard this. Meanwhile, Yi Xian gazed at the Wilderness God and said, "Let me ask you a question. I'll obliterate you if you answer me wrongly." As he spoke, he took a step forward, and a mysterious spacetime enveloped the God of Wilderness. The Wasteland God's expression changed drastically. Chapter 1929. What sort of spacetime is this? The god's eyes were filled with shock. Could this fellow really be a Destiny Realm expert? Yi Xian gazed at the god, and then he opened his palm to reveal a portrait. "Do you recognize this person?" The god frowned slightly as he glanced at the portrait. "It's her." Obviously, they knew each other. Yi Xian said, "Where is she now?" The god glanced at Yi Xian and fell silent. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you want to die?" The god's expression changed slightly, and then he glanced at Mu-Sen and Shuang, who stood respectfully behind Yi Xian. He hesitated for a moment before he said, "She's currently trapped in a space-time cage." Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. "A space-time cage?" The god gazed at Yi Xian. "You don't know what a space-time cage is?" Mu Sun looked at Yi Xian with slight surprise as well. Yi Xian's face was expressionless. Should I know about such a low-level thing? The god's mouth twitched. Is it low-level? Yi Xian waved his hand. Cut the crap. Take me there. The god glanced at Yi Xian but didn't say anything. Yi Xian turned around to look at Mu Sun and Shuang. Chop him up. Shuang didn't hesitate to transform into a ray of light that slashed down. The god's expression changed drastically when he saw this. He wasn't afraid of Shuang, but he was very afraid of the sword in Shuang's hand because that sword could easily tear his body apart. Most importantly, Mu Sun was right there. If the two of them were to join forces, they would be able to kill him with ease. The god hurriedly said, "Wait." In the distance, Yi Xian said, "Stop." Shuang immediately stopped, and then he retreated respectfully behind Yi Xian. Yi Xian gazed at the god. "Take me there." The wilderness god took a deep glance at Yi Xian, and then he said, "Come with me." With that, he turned around and the space in front of him turned pitch black. The god of the wilderness had entered. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the green profound sword in Shuang's hand fell into his hand. He followed them in. Mu Sun and Su Wang hurriedly followed. Soon, the four of them arrived at a mysterious spacetime. This spacetime was like a cage, and it was very, very sturdy. Yi Xian looked into the distance and saw a woman in the distance. It was none other than Sister Shui. At that moment, Sister Shui was locked in a spacetime prison. Not far from her stood two middle-aged men. At this moment, Shuang, who was beside Yi Xian, said in a deep voice, "The one on the left is King Martial Spirit, and the one on the right is Zhao Shenshao." Yi Xian glanced at them, and then he gazed at Sister Shui. At this moment, even though Sister Shui was imprisoned, she was fine. Meanwhile, young Nianxue noticed Yi Xian as well. She was slightly stunned when she saw Yi Xian, and then she smiled. "What are you doing here?" All of them gazed at Yi Xian when they heard young Nianxue. Yi Xian smiled. "Let's not talk about that for now." As he spoke, he walked slowly towards young Nianxue. King Martial Spirit and Zhao Shenshao frowned when they witnessed this scene. On the other hand, the wilderness god glanced at Yi Xian and remained silent. At this moment, he was quite fearful of Yi Xian. Actually, he was afraid that this fellow might really be at the Destiny Realm. Right when Yi Xian approached the spacetime cage, a wisp of a cold glow flashed in King Martial Spirit's eyes, and he was about to attack. However, Zhao Shenshao stopped him. Zhao Shenshao gazed at Yi Xian and said, "Let's wait and see." King Martial Spirit hesitated for a moment, but he didn't choose to attack in the end. After all, it was a spatial cage, and it was one that he and Zhao Shenshao had jointly set up. It was utterly impossible for an ordinary person to break through. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Open." As soon as he finished speaking, he stepped into the spatial cage. King Martial Spirit and Zhao Shenshao were stunned when they witnessed this scene. He went in just like that? On the other side, the wilderness god had an extremely solemn expression on his face as well. This fellow can actually disregard the spatial cage? Is he really at the Destiny Realm? Yi Xian walked over to young Nianxue, and he smiled. "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, he took young Nianxue's hand. In an instant, the mysterious spatial energy around young Nianxue vanished. A wisp of surprise flashed through young Nianxue's eyes when she witnessed this scene. Just like that, Yi Xian pulled young Nianxue out of the spatial cage. On the other side, King Martial Spirit and Zhao Shenshao had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. King Martial Spirit was about to attack when Zhao Shenshao stopped him. Meanwhile, Yi Xian turned around to gaze at King Martial Spirit and Zhao Shenshao. He didn't speak, and he just smiled with disdain. It was like he was looking at two ants. King Martial Spirit's expression instantly turned gloomy when he witnessed this scene, and he suddenly clenched his right hand and was about to attack. Meanwhile, Mu Sun suddenly smiled. "King Martial Spirit, what?" You intend to attack a Destiny Realm expert? Destiny Realm? King Martial's spirit was stunned, and then he gazed at Yi Xian with disbelief in his eyes. Destiny. Destiny Realm? Xinxiao's face was covered in disbelief as well. When did a Destiny Realm expert appear in Heaven Horizon? Meanwhile, Yi Xian had left with Yang Nianxue. Mu Sen and Su Wang hurriedly followed them. King Martial's spirit and the others had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. Meanwhile, Zhao Xinxiao suddenly said, "Is he really a Destiny Realm expert?" As he spoke, he gazed at the Wasteland's god. The Wasteland's god fell silent for a moment before he said, "I don't know." Zhao Xinxiao frowned slightly. "You don't know?" The Wasteland's god spoke in a low voice. "I suspected it as well. However, you've also seen how respectful Mu Sen and that sword cultivator woman are towards him. Not only that, but he can also ignore this space-time prison. Most importantly, I saw him use an extremely mysterious space-time. I've never seen that space-time before." Zhao Xinxiao's expression was quite unsightly when he heard this. King Martial's spirit's expression was extremely gloomy as well. He hadn't expected that a Destiny Realm expert would actually appear here. The cooked duck had flown away. Suddenly, a woman appeared here. It was Shinqin. King Martial's spirit and the others gazed at Shinqin, and she spoke indifferently. "Do all of you really believe that he's at the Destiny Realm?" The Wasteland's god stared at her. "What do you mean?" Shinqin smiled. "What do I mean? Let me tell all of you that fellow isn't at the Destiny Realm at all. He's at the Seamless Realm." The Wasteland's god spoke coldly. "You say that he's only at the Seamless Realm. Then let me ask you, why is he able to disregard the spatial cage? Is that space-time cage fake?" Shinqin spoke coldly. "The reason he can disregard the spatial cage is because of that sword in his hand. That sword is extremely special, and it can disregard any spatial cage. It's not because of his own strength." The Wasteland's god spoke in a low voice. "That sword can disregard any spatial cage?" Shinqin nodded. "Yes." The Wasteland's god continued. "Why can it disregard space?" Shinqin spoke indifferently. "How would I know?" The Wasteland's god smiled. "Miss, if what you said is true and he isn't at the Destiny Realm, then why is that sword in his hand so terrifying? It can actually disregard any spatial cage? You've already answered that question, so let me ask another one. Where did this sword come from?" Shinqin remained expressionless. "How would I know?" The Wasteland's god smiled. "You don't know? Then let me ask you again. You're also a peak primordial spirit powerhouse, so can you create a divine item that can disregard any spatial cage?" Shinqin was silent. Because she couldn't. The wilderness god shook his head and smiled. Furthermore, he used an extremely mysterious space-time. I've never seen such a mysterious space-time before. What I can confirm is that this mysterious space-time surpasses any space-time that I know of. Miss, can you tell me where this mysterious space-time came from? Shinqin looked at the Wasteland's god. "I'm here to tell you that he isn't at the Destiny Realm." "Why are you talking so much?" The Wasteland's god smiled. "Even if he really isn't at the Destiny Realm, he's definitely not an ordinary person. He might even have a Destiny Realm powerhouse backing him. Otherwise, he would never be in possession of these divine items." He shook his head and smiled. "That Mu Sen isn't a fool either, so why is he so respectful to that young man? No matter what the reason is, one thing is for sure, that young man is not simple." Shinqin looked at the Wasteland's god, not saying a word. The Wasteland's god continued. "Miss, you're telling us all of this because you want us to make a move against him. In other words, you're enemies with that young man, but you don't dare to make a move against him. Since he's only at the seamless path, then why don't you make a move against him?" "Make a move against him?" Shinqin's expression was quite unsightly. The Wasteland's god glanced at Shinqin with disdain. "Do I look like a retard to you?" As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Shinqin fell silent for a moment, and she intended to leave as well. Meanwhile, King Martial's spirit spoke abruptly. Miss, is that young man really not at the Destiny Realm? Shin-Chin glanced at King Martial's spirit. Believe it or not. King Martial's spirit chuckled. Of course I believe it. Because if that young man really is at the Destiny Realm, then he'll absolutely not let us go. Moreover, he hasn't made a move against us. Zhao Shenxiao spoke solemnly, just as the Wasteland's god said, that young man isn't an ordinary person. King Martial's spirit spoke ferociously. We've been chasing that woman for an entire month, and we're just about to obtain the mine. Why should we give it up the moment he arrives? As he spoke, his expression grew even more ferocious. So long as he isn't at the Destiny Realm, then why should we be afraid of him? Zhao Shenxiao was slightly hesitant. King Martial's spirit gazed at Shin-Chin. Miss, do you want to join forces? Shin-Chin hesitated for a moment and said, all right. King Martial's spirit said, let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot with Shin-Chin. Zhao Shenxiao hesitated for a moment, but he didn't choose to join forces because he trusted the Wasteland's god's words more. Yi Xian's group had just returned to Skypole City when King Martial's spirit and Shin-Chin appeared before them. Yi Xian frowned when he saw this. King Martial's spirit gazed at Mu Senior. Mu Sen, he isn't a Destiny Realm expert at all. The reason he's able to disregard space is entirely because of that sword in his hand. Without that sword, he's nothing. Mu Sen frowned when he heard this, and then he gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. It was this young lady who told you that, right? Shin-Chin gazed at Yi Xian. Are you still going to continue acting? Yi Xian smiled, and then he opened his palm, causing the green profound sword to fly over to King Martial's spirit. Didn't she say that this sword is formidable? Come, use it. King Martial's spirit's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he glanced at Shin-Chin. Shin-Chin remained silent because she felt that something was off. Meanwhile, King Martial's spirit suddenly grasped the sword and slashed down. Hiss! A ray of light slashed down, and space was torn apart. However, this was King Martial's spirit's own strength. King Martial's spirit was stunned. He was unwilling to give up, and he studied the green profound sword once more. However, he didn't notice anything special about it. It was a completely useless sword. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was far away, suddenly walked towards King Martial's spirit slowly. He said with a smile, the sword is extraordinary because of the person. In the hands of some people, this sword is a very ordinary sword. But in my hands, it is the most invincible sword in the world. As he spoke, he gazed at King Martial's spirit and smiled. The sword isn't important. What's important is the person who uses it. A sword is extraordinary because of the person, understand? Everyone was speechless. Chapter 1930. Fear arose in King Wu Ling's eyes as he gazed at Yi Xian who was walking over. Meanwhile, Shin-Chin suddenly laughed coldly. Yi Xian, you're still putting on an act. If you're really at the Fate Knower realm, then kill us. Yi Xian gazed at Shin-Chin and smiled. Kill you? Are you even worthy? Shin-Chin's expression instantly became extremely unsightly. What are you putting on an act for? Right at this moment, Yang Nianxue suddenly vanished on the spot. Shin-Chin's expression instantly changed drastically, and she swiftly raised her arm to block it. Bang! Along with a deafening explosion, Shin-Chin was blasted 30 kilometers away. As soon as she stopped moving, the expanse of space behind her was obliterated. Yi Xian was shocked at the sight of that. That Sister Shui was awesome. Yang Nianxue glanced at Shin-Chin who'd been blasted away and smiled. Do you know who he is? As she spoke, she turned around to gaze at Yi Xian, and then the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. He's my master. He attained the Fate Knower realm 1,000,000 years ago. Master. Everyone here was stunned when they heard Yang Nianxue. Yi Xian was the same, but he quickly returned to normal. Obviously, Big Sister Shui was playing along with his act. Big Sister Shui knows what to do. Shen Qin stared fixedly at Yang Nianxue. It's impossible for you to be his disciple. He's just a cultivator of the seamless Tao. Yang Nianxue shook her head. You really are an idiot. As she spoke, she turned around to gaze at King Wuling. King Wuling's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly said, "Sorry for the disturbance." As soon as he finished speaking, he hurriedly let go of the green profound sword, and it floated slowly over to Yi Xian. Yi Xian held the green profound sword in his hand and swung it lightly. In an instant, the space in the surroundings started to warp. King Wuling's eyelids twitched slightly when he witnessed this scene. Yi Xian glanced at King Wuling and smiled. I'm taking the Sky Palace crystal mine. If you're disgruntled, then feel free to call for revenge. No matter how many. I'm invincible, so do as you please. Everyone was speechless. King Wuling glanced at Yi Xian and hurriedly said, I wouldn't dare. This junior will take his leave. With that, he turned around and disappeared. Yi Xian glanced at Shen Qin in the distance and smiled. Lady Shen Qin, on account of our past relationship, I won't kill you today, you may leave. However, don't pester me anymore. I'm wholeheartedly pursuing the Tao, and I don't want to be tied down by relationships. Mu Sen and Su Wang's expressions became strange when they heard this. No wonder. So there was something going on between the two of them. Shen Qin's expression became extremely unsightly. Yi Xian, what nonsense are you spouting? When have I ever had any feelings for you? Yi Xian smiled and said, let's go. With that, he turned around and left. The divine quilt said angrily, speak clearly. She was about to chase after Yi Xian when Yang Nianxue suddenly blocked her way. Yang Nianxue looked at the divine quilt and said with a smile, let's go back. With that, she turned around and left. Shen Qin's expression was extremely unsightly. Meanwhile, Xiong Ho appeared by her side. She glanced at her and smiled. I told you not to expose him because it was useless. But you refused to believe me. Now you've suffered a loss, right? Shen Qin remained expressionless. All of you are a bunch of idiots. Xiong Ho shook her head. If you aren't an idiot, then why didn't you do anything to him? Shen Qin glanced at Xiong Ho. What are you trying to say? Xiong Ho smiled. I'm trying to say that you're an idiot. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Shen Qin spoke coldly. Xiong Ho, let me see how you'll obtain that mysterious space from him. Xiong Ho licked her candied haws and didn't even look back. You don't have to worry about that. Shen Qin's expression grew more and more unsightly. As soon as he found out that Yi Xian had returned to the city, the old man Profundity had immediately come out to greet Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian didn't leave just like that. He asked the old man Profundity to arrange a place for him to stay. Within a pavilion. Only Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue were within a room. Yi Xian smiled. Long time no see, big sister Shui. Yang Nianxue sized Yi Xian up and smiled. I never expected that you would come to save me. As she spoke, she sized up Yi Xian again. Are you really just a cultivator of the seamless path? Yi Xian nodded. Yang Nianxue gave him a thumbs up. Amazing. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Big sister Shui, what do you plan to do after this? Yang Nianxue glanced at the surroundings and said, I want to take you somewhere. Yi Xian asked, where? Yang Nianxue smiled, an ancient ruin. I obtained this heaven pole crystal ore from that ancient ruin. However, I didn't go deep into it, and I was just at the outer area. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Big sister Shui, why didn't father bring you along with him? Yang Nianxue immediately shook her head. Following father is truly too boring. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. It's really dangerous outside. Yang Nianxue smiled. It's good to be dangerous. Danger can temper oneself. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, that's true. Yang Nianxue glanced outside and said, let's set out in a while. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, should we bring Mu Sen and the others with us? Yang Nianxue smiled, why? Yi Xian said, I think that we can be of use. Moreover, it's a chaotic place, so it's good to have 2 more helpers. Yang Nianxue spoke in a low voice, aren't you afraid that they'll see through you? Yi Xian smiled, what's there to be afraid of? Don't I still have you, big sister Shui? Yang Nianxue asked, are you afraid that woman and the martial spirit king will spoil our plans again? Yi Xian nodded, I haven't done anything, so they'll get suspicious in the end. Moreover, you have a mine in your possession, so they won't give up on it. Yang Nianxue nodded, then I'll take it with me. As soon as she finished speaking, both of them left the pavilion. On the other hand, Mu Sen, Old Man Profound, and Xu Wang were waiting outside. Old Man Profound hurriedly said when he saw Yi Xian, Senior, are you uncomfortable? Yi Xian smiled, it's very comfortable. As he spoke, he glanced at the 3 of them and said, my disciple said that she discovered an ancient ruin, and her mine was discovered there. Are the 3 of you interested in going with her? The 3 of them were overjoyed when they heard this. Old Man Profound hurriedly said, of course I'm interested. But, is it convenient for us to go with her? Yi Xian said with a smile, why not? Old Man Profound immediately bowed slightly, thank you, Senior. Mu Sen bowed deeply as well, thank you. Yi Xian gazed at Xu Wang, you come with us as well. I'll guide you in the meantime so that you can attain the nascent soul realm. Xu Wang was excited when he heard this, and he immediately bowed respectfully, thank you, Senior. Yi Xian smiled. Xu Wang's combat strength was extremely formidable, so if he attained the nascent soul realm and possessed the green profound sword, then he would absolutely be invincible in the nascent soul realm. A short moment later, they set out. Old Man Profound spoke solemnly on the way, Senior, 2 women have been constantly following us from the shadows. Should we? Yi Xian turned around to glance at them. He naturally knew who Old Man Profound was talking about. It was naturally Xiong Ho and Shen Qin. They were very patient and had followed them all the way here. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, I know them. Let them follow us. When she spoke up to hear, she sighed softly, I can only blame myself for being too playful all those years ago. Hearing this, Old Man Profound Ji was taken aback, and then he laughed awkwardly. Shen Qin gazed at Yi Xian and the others in the distance, where are they going? Xiong Ho spoke indifferently, who knows? Shen Qin glanced at Xiong Ho and said, the members of the Tendo sect have arrived. Xiong Ho shook her head, what's the point? Not to mention them, even if the sect master of the Tendo sect were to be reborn, what's the point? Didn't you see? That fellow has 4 extraordinary bodyguards by his side right now. 4 extraordinary bodyguards. Shen Qin's expression was slightly unsightly when she heard this. Xiong Ho shook her head and sighed, damn it. Let me see how long this fellow can keep up his act. Shen Qin looked towards the distance with an expressionless face, if he encounters a true fate knower. At this point, she didn't continue speaking. A true fate knower expert? Even she hadn't seen one. Such an expert was truly too rare. In the distance, under Yang Nianshue's lead, everyone headed straight for the ancient ruins. On the way, Yi Xian gazed at Xu Wang, enter Xiao Ta's body and cultivate. Xu Wang was stunned, and then his voice trembled, can I? Yi Xian nodded, of course. As he spoke, he gazed at Yang Nianxue, heaven limit crystals. Yang Nianxue smiled, and then she tapped with her finger, causing a spatial ring to descend before Xu Wang. Xu Wang glanced at the spatial ring, and there were an entire 50,000 heaven limit crystals within it. Xu Wang's expression instantly changed when he witnessed this scene, After all, she relied on robbing others to obtain heaven limit crystals every single time, and she'd obtained 1,000 heaven limit crystals at most every year. Moreover, she'd exchanged her life for them. Yet now, Xu Wang had given her 50,000 heaven limit crystals. Yang Nianxue smiled, 50,000 heaven limit crystals should be sufficient for you to attain the soul origin realm. If it's not enough, then I'll give you more. Shuang bowed deeply, thank you. As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled, Miss Shuang, we can be considered to be fated. How about this? If you're willing, then take me as your master. Not only will I help you attain the soul origin realm, I'll even teach you a peerless and extraordinary sword technique. Mu Sen and Old Man Profundity were visibly moved when they heard this. Both of them glanced at Shuang with a trace of envy in their eyes. Take her as his master. That's equivalent to finding an extraordinary backer. Shuang didn't hesitate at all, and he immediately bowed deeply, greetings, master. Yi Xian roared with laughter, there's no need for such formalities. Enter the tower and cultivate. If there's anything you don't understand, then feel free to ask me. Shuang nodded, all right. As soon as she finished speaking, she entered Xiao Ta's body. Inside Xiao Ta, Shuang gazed at the spatial ring in her hand, and she took a deep breath. As long as she had enough heaven limit crystals, she was confident that she could attain the soul origin realm. This was how the world was. No matter how hard you worked or how talented you were, if you didn't have money, then it was all nonsense. Most of the time, if someone helped you up, then your life would be completely different. After a while, Shuang slowly closed her eyes and began to cultivate. Chapter 1931. 2 hours later, Yi Xian's group arrived at the depths of a mountain range. Mu Sen glanced at the surroundings and said, Miss Shui, this is the ancient ruin? Yang Nianxue nodded. Mu Sen spoke in a low voice, but there's nothing here. Yang Nianxue smiled, there's a secret here. As she spoke, she walked over to a nearby tree, and then she pressed down lightly with her right hand. A strand of mysterious energy seeped into the tree, and then the mountain that was over 1 kilometer away actually started to become illusory. Not long after, under everyone's watchful eyes, the mountain slowly split open, and an ancient black palace appeared within the mountain. Mu Sen and the others were visibly moved when they witnessed this scene. A ruin. Both of them were about to head over when they seemed to have thought of something, and they stopped and turned around to look at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yang Nianxue smiled and said, this place isn't simple at all. For example, there's a spatial formation not too far away from us. Outsiders will instantly lose their sense of direction upon entering it, and then they'll fall into a boundless spatial abyss. Even a soul core realm expert can't disregard the spatial abyss there. Mu Sen spoke in a low voice, thank you for the warning, Miss Shui. Yi Xian smiled, let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked towards the distance. Mu Sen and the old man hurriedly followed him. When Yi Xian's group stepped foot into that expanse of space had instantly crisscrossed. The expressions of Mu Sen and the others changed slightly when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, a mysterious spacetime suddenly appeared around Yi Xian, and as soon as this mysterious spacetime appeared, the spacetime formations in the surroundings started to disperse bit by bit. They weren't able to endure Yi Xian's mysterious space at all. Mu Sen and Old Man Profundity exchanged glances when they witnessed this scene, and there was a wisp of shock in their eyes. He really is a big shot. Actually, Yang Nianxue was quite shocked as well. In the beginning, she'd thought that Yi Xian was putting on a show, but she'd recently noticed that Yi Xian was actually quite formidable. Yi Xian turned around to gaze at them and smiled, let's go. All of them continued forward. When they arrived at the foot of the mountain, there was a middle-aged man standing on the stone steps. The middle-aged man was wearing a very simple gray robe and a bamboo hat. His eyes were slightly closed, and he did not seem to be alive. Yi Xian glanced at the middle-aged man, and at this moment, the middle-aged man slowly opened his eyes. Mu Sen and the old man's expressions changed slightly when they saw this scene, and they secretly raised their guard in their hearts. Because the two of them couldn't see through this middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's gaze landed on Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian was silent. Yi Xian shook his head. I wouldn't dare. Could it be that Senior doesn't want to see the person behind me first before deciding if he wants these two divine artifacts? The white-robed old man roared with laughter. All right, then let me see who the great figure behind you is. Yi Xian nodded, and then he passed the green profound sword to the white-robed old man. Senior, you can use this sword to find the person behind me. The white-robed old man glanced at Yi Xian, and then he took the green profound sword and said, the old man has traversed countless universes, and there have been people that the old man fears. However, there are no more than two of them. As he spoke, he gazed at the green profound sword in his hand, and then he smiled. Let me see who the person behind you is. Yi Xian smiled but didn't say anything. The white-robed old man suddenly tightened his grip on the green profound sword, and it trembled violently. The space before him gradually warped, and at the same time, it gradually became illusory. Yi Xian gazed at the white-robed old man. He didn't speak. Right at this moment, the white-robed old man suddenly smiled. I hope the person behind you doesn't disappoint the old man. Yi Xian grinned. Senior, I have a question. The white-robed old man roared with laughter. You can ask it later. Yi Xian shook his head. It's better to ask it now. I'm afraid I won't be able to ask it later. The white-robed old man frowned slightly. What do you mean? Yi Xian didn't answer him, and he asked instead, Senior, have you seen an expert above the predestined realm? The white-robed old man was stunned, and then he smiled. Are you trying to say that the person behind you is an expert above the predestined realm? Yi Xian smiled and didn't speak. The white-robed old man shook his head and smiled. How laughable. There's no such thing as a realm above the predestined realm in this world because no one has created it until now. You're actually trying to deceive me? How foolish. Yi Xian grinned and didn't speak. Right at this moment, the white-robed old man suddenly raised his head and looked into the sky, and his eyes narrowed slightly. I sense it. Hiss. A strand of sword light suddenly entered between the white-robed old man's brows. Bang! The white-robed old man's figure shook violently, and the vitality within his body was directly eliminated. The white-robed old man's eyes were wide open, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Killed in a second? I was killed in a second? At this moment, his mind was in a complete mess. He was an expert at the peak of the predestined realm, but he was killed in a second. And he didn't even know who killed him in a second. The white-robed old man looked at Yi Xian, and just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly wielded his sword, and the white-robed old man's head was directly cut off. At the same time, the white-robed old man's storage ring was taken by Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't look at the storage ring. Instead, he carried the white-robed old man's head and walked out. When Mu Sun and the other two saw the white-robed old man's head, they directly froze on the spot. The middle-aged man was also dumbfounded. His master was dead? Yi Xian smiled lightly. We didn't have a good talk, so I killed him. Unfortunately, he was too weak, and couldn't even take a sword from me. As he spoke, he sighed softly. Are all the predestined realm experts in this era so weak? I only used 30% of my strength in that sword just now. Everyone. P.S. Asking for votes. Chapter 1932. At this moment, all of them were stunned. A life knower realm expert had been killed. Moreover, he'd been killed with such ease. What did this mean? It meant that the gap in their strengths was too huge. Yi Xian walked over to the others with the old man's head in his hand, and then he gazed at the middle-aged man who stood on guard below the stairs. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically, and his eyes were filled with terror. He knew how terrifying his master was, and it was even his master's true body this time. However, he hadn't expected that his true body would be instantly killed as well. How terrifying is this fellow's strength? He killed a life-knower realm expert in an instant. Yi Xian gazed at the middle-aged man and smiled. What's your name? The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before his voice trembled. Mu Jianghe. Yi Xian smiled, follow me from now on. The middle-aged man was stunned, and then he hurriedly bowed respectfully. From now on, I, Mu Jianghe, pledge my loyalty to Senior, and I'm willing to serve you faithfully. Yi Xian smiled, and then he passed the head to Mu Jianghe, bury him. We were once master and servant after all. Mu Jianghe was slightly hesitant. Yi Xian smiled, don't worry, I'm not testing you. There's no need for me to do this, right? Mu Jianghe was relieved when he heard this. He took the head, and his hands trembled as he gazed at it. On the other hand, Mu Sen and Old Man Profundity couldn't help but bow. Since he was able to instantly kill a life knower realm expert, it meant that this senior wasn't an ordinary life knower realm expert. He's too strong. I must hug him properly. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings, and then he smiled, this is a small abode. At this moment, Mu Jianghe, who had returned, hurriedly said, this place used to be the territory of the mysterious East sect. Later, my master, the former master, took a fancy to it, so he destroyed the mysterious East sect and took it for himself. Yi Xian smiled, there are heaven rank crystals here? Mu Jianghe nodded, moreover, there are 3 top-grade heaven rank crystals here. 3. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Yang Nianxue. The corners of Yang Nianxue's mouth lifted. I'll do it. As she said that, she pressed her right hand down lightly. In an instant, the entire ground trembled violently. Gradually, the ground split open and 3 supreme-grade heaven supreme crystals appeared before everyone's eyes. Every single crystal mine contained close to 100,000 top-grade heaven supreme crystals. The eyes of Mu Sen and Old Man Profound Secrets turned red when they saw this scene. That was over 100,000 supreme-grade heaven supreme crystals. Moreover, it was of the highest quality. One had to know that 1 supreme-grade heaven-grade crystal was equivalent to 5 ordinary heaven-grade crystals. Although their eyes were red, Mu Sen and Old Man Profound Secrets were still very calm. Meanwhile, Mu Jianghe hesitated for a moment before he said, Senior, if you take them away, then they'll be useless. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Mu Jianghe smiled bitterly. Because these 3 crystal mines can only survive here. If they leave this place, their spiritual qi will leak out. Without the nourishment of the power of the earth vein, they won't be able to condense the supreme heaven crystal anymore. That's why their previous master didn't take them with him all those years ago. Yi Xian glanced down. Sure enough, it was just as Mu Jianghe said, there was extremely pure energy of the earth vein beneath the ground. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian grinned, I have a better place than this. As he spoke, he immediately placed the 3 supreme-grade heaven supreme crystals into Xiao Ta's storage ring. After he placed the 3 supreme-grade heaven supreme crystals into Xiao Ta, Yi Xian suddenly thought of something, and it was that the flow of time within the pagoda was different from the outside world. For example, it took 10 years to condense a single supreme-grade heaven supreme crystal in the outside world. But if the heaven supreme crystal mine was within Xiao Ta's storage ring, then it meant that he would be able to obtain one in a single day. What a huge profit. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian looked at Mu Sen and Old Man Profound Ji and smiled, my disciple and I will each take a heaven supreme crystal mine. I won't give you the remaining one, but I can give you the 120,000 supreme grade heaven supreme crystals in it. What do you think? Hearing this, the 2 of them instantly became excited. Mu Sen's voice trembled, Senior, the 2 of us didn't do anything. This. Yi Xian smiled, since you're following me, then you should at least get some soup when I have meat to eat. Otherwise, what's the point of you following me? As he spoke, he pointed with his finger, and 2 spatial rings floated in front of the 2 of them. Mu Sen and Old Man Profound Ji hesitated. Yi Xian smiled, I'll give it to you. Just take it. Old Man Profound Ji smiled bitterly, Senior, the 2 of us didn't do anything to help you. This is too much for us to accept. Yi Xian smiled, that's enough. Just take it. Hearing this, the 2 of them no longer hesitated, and immediately accepted the 2 spatial rings. After Old Man Profound Ji accepted the spatial rings, he bowed deeply to Yi Xian. I, Profound Ji, will never forget Senior's kindness. In the future, if Senior needs anything, just let me know. I, Profound Ji, will definitely not refuse. Mu Sun also bowed deeply. Senior, my life is yours from now on. Yi Xian smiled. Let's cut the formalities. I still need to stay in the heavenly limit realm for some time. During this time, I might need you to help me with something. Mu Sun hurriedly said, I'm willing to serve Senior. Old Man Profound Ji also hurriedly said, I'm willing to serve Senior. Yi Xian smiled. Let's go. After saying this, he led the group out of the ancient ruins. After returning to the heavenly limit city, Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue returned to the room that Old Man Profound Ji had arranged for them. Yi Xian smiled. Sister, we've struck it big this time. As he spoke, he took out the spatial ring of the life-knowing state expert. There were over 1 million top-grade sky crystals in the spatial ring. Moreover, there were some divine objects in the spatial ring, and it was obvious that they were priceless. Yang Nianxue rummaged through the spatial ring, and in the end, she took out a blood-red flag. This thing isn't simple. Yi Xian looked at the flag, and there were 3 large blood-red words written on it, Soul Summoning Banner. Yi Xian smiled. Sister Shui, you can choose whatever you want. Yang Nianxue smiled. Let me study this. As she spoke, she put the Soul Summoning Banner away, and then she took out a black ring. She sized up the ring and smiled. So it's a guardian ring. Yi Xian was slightly curious. Guardian ring? Yang Nianxue nodded. This spatial ring is quite interesting. It contains 9 mysterious guardian spacetime, and once activated, the 9 guardian spacetime can combine into one, and it's more than enough to block a life-knowing state expert's all-out attack. Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian. That old man didn't use this ring until he died. Was she the one who made the move? Yi Xian nodded. Yang Nianxue shook her head with a complicated expression. No wonder that old man didn't even have a chance to fight back. Destiny. If that woman made a move, even 10 life-knowing state experts would be instantly killed. Yang Nianxue handed the spatial ring to Yi Xian. You keep it. However, Yi Xian shook his head. You keep it. Yang Nianxue smiled. I don't need this thing, but you can. Just as Yi Xian was about to say something, Yang Nianxue glared at Yi Xian. I said it's for you, so it's for you. Cut the crap. Saying this, she put the spatial ring away. The guardian ring is for you, and everything else in the spatial ring is for me. Hearing this, Yi Xian was dumbfounded, and the gratitude he felt just now vanished without a trace. This big sister must be a bandit. There are 1 million supreme-grade heavenly G crystals in there. Seeing Yi Xian's dumbfounded expression, Yang Nianxue blinked. You can't bear to part with it? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then said, Of course I can bear to give it to you, big sister, but, suddenly, Yang Nianxue slapped Yi Xian's shoulder. Good little brother. Yi Xian, Yang Nianxue continued, I want to break through to life-knowing state. Yi Xian was surprised. Break through to life-knowing state. Yang Nianxue nodded. I need a lot of heavenly G crystals. Even 1 million might not be enough. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Is it that terrifying? Yang Nianxue rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. What else can I do? You should know that there are pitifully few life-knowing state cultivators in this universe. Why are there so few? Because breaking through to life-knowing state from primordial spirit state requires a lot of supreme-grade heavenly G crystals. This consumption is not something ordinary people can afford. Many people can't reach life-knowing state, not because they are not talented enough, not because they don't work hard enough, but because they don't have money, understand? No money. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Indeed, cultivation requires a lot of money. Yang Nianxue said again, I don't know if this 1 million supreme-grade heavenly G crystals is enough, but I feel that it might not be enough, so, she looked at Yi Xian, and the corners of her mouth curled up. brother, you have to think of a way to get more from me. She looked at Yi Xian, and the corners of her mouth curled up. Big brother, you have to think of a way to get more from me. Yang Nianxue pointed at the storage ring on her hand. This life-knowing state cultivator's storage ring has many divine items, and we can auction them. We should be able to get some, but it might not be enough. In any case, you do as you see fit. I'm going to cultivate. When I reach life-knowing state, I'll protect you. With that, she entered Xiao Ta. In the room, Yi Xian felt a headache coming on. This big sister is too unreliable. Find her some heavenly G crystals. Yi Xian sighed in a low voice and then left the room. He looked around. Xuanji. Old man Profound Secrets appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he bowed deeply. What can I do for you, senior? Yi Xian said with a smile, is there any auction here? Old man Profound Secrets smiled, of course there is. What do you want to buy, senior? Yi Xian shook his head, I want to sell some miscellaneous items that I don't need. Old man Profound Secrets hurriedly said, I'll arrange it. Yi Xian smiled, then I'll trouble you. Old man Profound Secrets hurriedly shook his head, it's no trouble. Senior, please wait a moment, I'll inform you after I arrange it. Yi Xian nodded, all right. Old man Profound Secrets turned and left. At this time, Yi Xian turned to the side, Miss Xiong Ho, come out. Not far away, Xiong Ho slowly walked out from the corner of the street. Yi Xian looked at Xiong Ho and smiled, you've been with me for a long time. Xiong Ho said solemnly, let's cooperate. Yi Xian blinked, cooperate? Xiong Ho nodded. Yi Xian's lips curled up, Miss Xiong Ho, I gave you a chance once, but you didn't care. Now you want to cooperate? Sorry, I don't want to. With that, he turned and left. At this time, Xiong Ho suddenly smiled, I have a secret, you'll definitely be interested. Yi Xian didn't stop. Xiong Ho said, someone is planning to kill you. Kill me? Yi Xian smiled disdainfully, under 3 swords, I'm invincible. Above 3 swords, I'll trade 1 for 1. Chapter 1933. Arrogant. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Xiong Ho knew that this fellow was completely arrogant now. However, he had the capital to be arrogant now. This fellow had several peak essence soul realm experts by his side. Even she did not dare to approach him. Xiong Ho was silent for a moment before sighing softly. She had lost her best opportunity. Originally, she could have worked with Yi Xian, and working with Yi Xian would have been extremely beneficial to her. However, she had been too greedy at that time. That greed had caused her to lose her best opportunity. Moments later, Xiong Ho turned and left. After Yi Xian returned to his room, he slowly closed his eyes. Xiong Ho had said that someone wanted to kill him. Who could it be? The first person he thought of was Shen Qin. However, with Shen Qin's strength, it was impossible for him to come looking for trouble alone. In other words, there was someone else. King Martial Spirit? God of the Wilderness? Yi Xian fell into deep thought. Anything was possible. At that moment, Su Wang suddenly appeared before Yi Xian. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback, then overjoyed. Essence Soul Realm? Su Wang bowed deeply. Master, I have reached the Essence Soul Realm. Essence Soul Realm. Yi Xian smiled. Not bad at all. With that said, he brought Su Wang into Xiao Ta. Inside Xiao Ta, Yi Xian looked at Su Wang. Now, I will teach you a sword technique that I created. This sword technique is called Life-Death Draw. This sword technique is too powerful, so I will just casually show it to you so that it doesn't destroy this universe. With that said, he drew his sword and slashed. Chi! A beam of sword light slashed down, and the entire spacetime turned illusory. Su Wang was shocked. This this is stacking? Yi Xian nodded. I just stacked 6,000 of them. Come, try it. Su Wang hurriedly nodded. All right. Under Yi Xian's guidance, Xu Wang began to practice draw the sword to determine life and death. Needless to say, Su Wang's natural talent in the sword Dao was truly terrifying. It didn't take him long to learn the sword draw of life and death. Moreover, he was able to stack a few thousand sword strikes as soon as he learned it. This made Yi Xian blush with shame. After a long time, Xu Wang stopped. She looked at Yi Xian and said excitedly, Master, I can now stack 5,000 sword draws to determine life and death. Yi Xian smiled faintly. Don't be satisfied. You should know that if I use my full strength, I can overlay 100,000 daos with a single thought. 100,000. Xu Wang's eyes widened in disbelief. You can stack up to 100,000? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Su Wang's expression gradually turned solemn. How terrifying would it be if 100,000 swords were drawn to determine life and death? Yi Xian smiled and said, Take your time. Xu Wang nodded. Understood. Yi Xian passed a spatial ring to Su Wang. Cultivating this sword skill will consume a lot of energy. There are 50,000 supreme-grade heavenly crystals in this spatial ring. It should be enough for you to cultivate for a while. Let me know if you have any questions or needs. He left Xiao Ta as soon as he finished speaking. Su Wang gazed at the spatial ring in his hand and fell silent for a long time. No one had ever been so nice to her. A short while later, Su Wang put the spatial ring away and started to cultivate. Outside Xiao Ta, Yi Xian was slightly excited. Su Wang had reached the primordial spirit realm. If she used sword draws to determine life and death with the green profound sword, she would definitely be invincible in the primordial spirit realm. Moreover, she might even be able to fight a life-knowing realm cultivator. After all, that was the green profound sword. It was definitely an existence that could challenge those of a higher realm. Besides that, Sister Xue might be able to attain the life-knowing realm as well. If Sister Xue could attain the life-knowing realm, it would naturally be extremely beneficial to him. However, the consumption of energy for Sister Xue to attain the life-knowing realm was truly too great. Up until now, Sister Xue had already consumed over 100,000 supreme-grade extreme heaven crystals. At this rate, 1,000,000 crystals would probably be far from enough. He had to think of a way to obtain more extreme heaven crystals. At this moment, there was a sudden knock on the door. Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and looked outside the door. Come in. The door opened and old man Xuanji walked in. He bowed slightly and said, Senior, the auction is about to begin. Yi Xian smiled. So soon? Old man Xuanji smiled. I dare not delay Senior's arrangements. Yi Xian laughed. Then let's go. He and old man Xuanji disappeared from the room. Heaven's Fate City, Xuanji Pavilion. The Xuanji Pavilion was old man Xuanji's territory. This time, the auction would be held in old man Xuanji's Xuanji Pavilion. Old man Xuanji had stayed in Heaven's Fate City for over 1,000,000 years. His influence was extremely great. Under his arrangements, basically all the influential people in Heaven's Fate City had come. Of course, the main reason was still Yi Xian. This was because old man Xuanji had advertised that a life-knowing state expert would be auctioning divine items. A life-knowing state expert. How could the items of a life-knowing state expert be ordinary? In a short while, the entire Xuanji Pavilion was filled with over 100 experts. There weren't many people, but the weakest was at the primordial spirit realm. In old man Xuanji's words, those below the primordial spirit realm were all paupers. There was no point in participating in the auction. Old man Xuanji brought Yi Xian to a small pavilion. This small pavilion just happened to have a view of the entire auction venue below. Old man Xuanji bowed slightly. May I know what divine items Senior is auctioning? Yi Xian handed the storage ring in his hand to Old Man Xuanji. It's all inside. Old Man Xuanji glanced at it and his expression changed drastically. This, he looked at Yi Xian. Senior, are you selling all these divine items? Yi Xian nodded. The divine items left behind by the life-knowing state expert were all very good. However, to him, apart from the guardian ring, the rest were basically useless. Because he had the Azure Profound Sword and Xiao Ta, he really didn't care about the other divine items. Old Man Xuanji smiled bitterly. Senior, if these divine items are released, they will definitely shock them. Yi Xian laughed. As long as they can be sold for a good price. Old Man Xuanji smiled. That's for sure. Senior, please take a seat. I'll go make the arrangements. He turned and left after saying this. Yi Xian looked around and then sat down. He closed his eyes slightly. At this moment, he was thinking. If his enemies wanted to touch him, how would they do it? The answer was that they would definitely wait until he was alone before making a move. At this point, Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank. He hurriedly looked around. There was nothing around him. Yi Xian tried hard to calm himself down. A moment later, a smile appeared on his face. Since you're already here, come on out. No response. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Is there really no one here? A moment later, Yi Xian leaned back on the chair and said, since you're already here, come on out. Still no response. Yi Xian would say this every quarter of an hour. He had nothing better to do anyway. The auction had begun. The first divine item had caused the experts in the auction hall to be excited. The first divine item was a spear that contained many special space-time abilities. The starting price was 10,000 heavenly crystal. In just a short while, the price had increased to 30,000 heavenly crystal. It might seem like a small amount, but it was actually a lot. Because the heavenly crystal was too precious in this place. In the pavilion, Yi Xian would say this every 15 minutes. Since you're already here, come on out. Just like that, time trickled by. Around 2 hours later, Yi Xian had earned 200,000 heavenly crystal. When one of the divine items was sold, Yi Xian said again, since you're already here, come on out. As soon as he finished speaking, a shadow suddenly appeared behind him. Sensing the shadow behind him, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. Damn it. There's really someone here. The shadow said in a hoarse voice, how did you find me? Yi Xian's expression was calm. Get lost. The shadow hesitated for a moment before it vanished silently. Sensing the shadow's disappearance, Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Damn it. Someone really wants to kill me. Who could it be? Shenqin. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's expression turned gloomy. Damn it. This damned woman. Outside the auction house, somewhere in the clouds, a woman looked down at the auction in silence. That woman was the Shenqin. Moreover, there was a middle-aged man by the woman's side, and it was the Martial Spirit King. The reason the Martial Spirit King had come to target Yi Xian again was because he'd investigated Yi Xian's origins, and he'd personally investigated Yi Xian. Yi Xian wasn't at the Destiny realm at all. This fellow was just putting on an act. Shenqin suddenly said, will that fellow succeed? The Martial Spirit King smiled, don't worry, Brother Dark Addiction's concealment technique is peerless in the world. Besides true Destiny realm experts, even I wouldn't be able to notice him. On the other hand, Yi Xian is merely a cultivator of the seamless path. It's utterly impossible for him to notice Brother Dark Addiction. Shenqin spoke in a low voice, don't underestimate that fellow. Even though his cultivation is low, he has quite a few divine items in his possession. We can't be careless. The Martial Spirit King was just about to speak when a shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. The Martial Spirit King was delighted when he saw the shadow, and he hurriedly asked, Brother Dark Addiction, did you succeed? Dark Addiction's expression was extremely unsightly. Martial Spirit King, is there something wrong with you? Huh? Is there something wrong with your head? The Martial Spirit King was stunned. Brother Dark Addiction, what do you mean? Dark Addiction said angrily, what do I mean? Didn't you tell me that the young man is only a cultivator of the seamless path? Not a Destiny Realm expert at all? The Martial Spirit King said, yes. He's only a cultivator of the seamless path, not a Destiny Realm expert at all. What's wrong? Did something go wrong? Dark Addiction was furious. Something went wrong? I almost didn't make it back. The Martial Spirit King said in a low voice, Brother Dark Addiction, were you discovered by Musen and Old Man Profundity? Dark Addiction said coldly, they didn't notice me. The Martial Spirit King was slightly puzzled, then? Dark Addiction said angrily, then my ass. As soon as I entered the pavilion, that young man noticed me before my feet even touched the ground. You actually said he's not a Destiny Realm expert? Martial Spirit King, there's no enmity between us, so why are you trying to harm me? Fortunately, that senior didn't intend to kill me. Otherwise, would have fucking died there. The Martial Spirit King and Shinchin were dumbfounded. P.S. When will you become famous after writing for 5 years? Chapter 1934. King Martial Spirit spoke in a low voice. Brother Dark Addiction, you said that Yi Xian noticed you? Dark Addiction spoke in a low voice. Do you think I'm lying to you? King Martial Spirit and Shinchin exchanged glances, and there was a wisp of shock in their eyes. Shinchin spoke in a low voice. I told you that fellow isn't simple. King Martial Spirit was about to speak, but Dark Addiction suddenly turned around. Who is it? The three of them turned around and saw a man walking over slowly from not too far away. It was Yi Xian. Their expressions were quite unsightly when they saw Yi Xian. It was especially so for Dark Addiction. Not only was his expression unsightly, there was even a wisp of fear in his eyes. Yi Xian gazed at Dark Addiction and smiled. Is there enmity between you and King Martial Spirit and Miss Shinchin? Dark Addiction fell silent. Meanwhile, King Martial Spirit spoke abruptly. Yi Xian, you're not a Destiny Realm expert at all. Yi Xian roared with laughter. Destiny Realm? King Martial Spirit, what a joke. As he spoke, he suddenly said, kill him. As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of light flashed. Hiss. The space here was instantly torn apart. King Martial Spirit's expression instantly changed drastically, and he charged forward and slammed his fist forward. A powerful force erupted from his fist like a volcano, and it instantly caused the entire city to seethe. The expressions of all the experts within the city changed drastically, and they raised their heads to look up into the clouds. Bang! High above in the clouds, an expanse of sword light suddenly exploded, and then a middle-aged man retreated repeatedly. It was King Martial Spirit. As soon as King Martial Spirit stopped, his body instantly transformed into nothingness, and only his soul remained. It wasn't Yi Xian who attacked, but Su Wang who'd attained the Origin Spirit Realm. King Martial Spirit gazed at Su Wang with disbelief. You've actually attained the Origin Spirit Realm, and your combat strength is actually so terrifying. Dark Addiction and Shinchin's expressions were extremely unsightly as well. Both of them hadn't expected Su Wang's strength to be so terrifying. He shattered King Martial Spirit's body with a single strike of his sword. Meanwhile, Su Wang glanced coldly at King Martial Spirit who only had his soul left. How dare trash like you scheme against my master? Master? King Martial Spirit narrowed his eyes. Who is your master? In the distance, Yi Xian smiled and said, who do you think it is? King Martial Spirit's pupils suddenly constricted. You're just a seamless Dao, how can you be her master? Seamless Dao? Yi Xian laughed. Martial Spirit King, you are really too funny. King Martial Spirit said angrily, Yi Xian, stop pretending. If you have the ability, then do it yourself. Come, do it. You think you're worthy? At this moment, a voice came from the side. Everyone heard the voice and looked over. Not far away, Musen and Old Man Profound Secrets were slowly walking over. Old Man Profound Secrets looked coldly at King Marshal Illuminous. An ant like you is worthy of a senior? King Marshal Spirit stared at Old Man Profound Secrets. Old Man Profound Secrets, you have lived for millions of years. Is your intelligence so low? This guy is just using the seamless Tao. Can't you tell? Old Man Profound Secrets said angrily, shut up. King Marshal Spirit, you're a veteran Essence Soul Realm powerhouse at any rate. Why is your intelligence so low? King Marshal Spirit said angrily, we will know if he's at the Destiny Knowing Realm the moment he makes a move. Get him to make a move. Old Man Profound Secrets said angrily, how can an ant like you be worthy of a senior? Do you know that when we entered the ancient ruins, a senior instantly killed a Destiny Knowing Realm expert with a single sword strike? We saw it with our own eyes, so how can it be fake? King Marshal Spirit was stunned, and then he said, absolutely impossible. This Yi Xian is just a human from a low-level civilization. It's impossible for him to be at the Destiny Knowing Realm. He's just an ant. Old Man Profound Secrets shook his head and looked at King Marshal Spirit with a trace of pity in his eyes. This child is too stupid. There's no saving him. At this moment, Yi Xian smiled and said, kill him. As soon as he finished speaking, Shuang suddenly vanished on the spot. King Marshal Spirit's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly said, Miss Shenqin, save me. Shenqin didn't stop Shuang, and she charged towards Yi Xian instead. She was very clearly aware that so long as everyone found out that Yi Xian was a fake Destiny Knowing Realm expert, then Yi Xian would be finished. Yi Xian smiled as he gazed at Shenqin, and he had no intention to attack. Meanwhile, Musen obstructed Yi Xian's path while a wisp of viciousness flashed through his eyes. Are you even worthy of attacking a senior? As he spoke, he charged forward. Bang! Shenqin was forced to a stop by a powerful force. Shenqin was about to attack again when she seemed to have noticed something, and she suddenly turned around. A ray of light flashed from afar, and then the green profound sword pierced directly into the center of King Marshal Spirit's forehead. After that, it started to madly absorb King Marshal Spirit's soul. It was gone. The expressions of all the nascent soul realm experts in the surroundings turned slightly solemn when they witnessed this scene. After all of them were at the nascent soul realm, and their strengths were on par with King Marshal Spirit. However, Shuang had been able to kill King Marshal Spirit with 2 strikes of the sword. What did this mean? It meant that Shuang could kill them with 2 strikes of the sword as well. Musen and Old Man Profundity exchanged glances. Since Shuang became Yi Xian's follower, his strength has grown at a terrifying rate. On the other side, Dark Addiction glanced at the surroundings, and then he vanished without a trace. Flee first. Yi Xian glanced at Dark Addiction, but he didn't stop him. Of course, he couldn't stop him as well. Yi Xian gazed at Shenqin and smiled, Miss Shenqin, we've known each other for a long time, and I didn't intend to kill all of you. However, you've repeatedly challenged my patience, and I can't tolerate it any longer. As he spoke, he gazed at Shuang. Shuang understood his intentions, and he transformed into a ray of light that vanished on the spot. Hiss! The space here was instantly torn apart. Shenqin's expression instantly changed drastically. She suddenly pressed her palms together, and then she pressed them forward lightly. In an instant, countless strands of space suddenly condensed into a spatial wall. Defend! At this moment, the space where Shenqin resided was instantly impregnable. However, as soon as Shuang's attack arrived, the impregnable spatial wall was easily torn apart like tofu. Hiss! A strand of light pierced through the center of Shenqin's forehead. At the instant that it vanished, Shuang had appeared behind Shenqin. However, the green profound sword was still there. Instant kill. A deathly silence filled the surroundings. Mu Sen and Old Man Profundity's gazes had been constantly fixed on the green profound sword. At this moment, they'd noticed that it wasn't that Xu Wang's combat strength was too abnormal, it was the sword itself that was too abnormal. The sword's boost to Xu Wang's battle prowess was just too high. Shen Qin gazed at Yi Xian with slight disbelief. You. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. If I die, then so be it. Be more straightforward. Don't waste your breath. Have a safe journey. As soon as he finished speaking, he issued a command in his heart, and the green profound sword completely absorbed Shen Qin's soul. Yi Xian smiled. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Meanwhile, Old Man Profundity spoke in a low voice. Senior, the wilderness god and Zhao Shenshao are on the other side. Should we? Yi Xian glanced to the right and smiled. I'm someone who doesn't offend me, so I won't be annoyed. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished into the distance. Mu Sen, who stood by Old Man Profundity's side, suddenly smiled. It's said that experts are capricious and have strange tempers. However, I feel that not only is Senior not capricious, but he's also willing to reason with others. Most importantly, he's approachable and easy to get along with. Old Man Profundity nodded and smiled. Senior is indeed approachable and has a warm personality. It's our fortune to have met Senior. Mu Sen shook his head and smiled. Miss Xu Wang is the greatest fortune. Old Man Profundity shook his head and smiled as well. Indeed, Old Man Profundity shook his head and smiled bitterly as well. Actually, the one who benefited the most was Xu Wang. This woman was absolutely invincible amongst those of the same realm of cultivation. Moments later, the two of them left. After the two of them left, Zhao Shenshao withdrew his gaze from the clouds and sighed softly. I tried to persuade King Martial Spirit, but he just couldn't accept it. This unwillingness caused his millions of years of bitter cultivation to turn into nothingness. Next to him, Wilderness God smiled. Greed. Zhao Shenshao looked into the distance with a complicated expression. Wilderness God, do you think that young Master Yi is at the destiny-knowing state? Wilderness God shook his head. It's no longer important. Zhao Shenshao smiled. I think it's quite important. How should I put it? Think about it, if he really isn't at the destiny-knowing state, then why are Mu Sen and the others so loyal to him? Are they all idiots? Obviously not. Also, did you see that Xu Wang woman? She was only at the life god realm at the beginning, but she reached the primordial spirit realm not long after she followed Yi Xian. Most importantly, her combat strength has reached such a level. Do you think that's normal? Wilderness God fell silent. Zhao Shenshao said, there's something else. Didn't you notice? Mu Sen and the others are becoming more and more respectful to Yi Xian. If Yi Xian isn't at the destiny-knowing state, why would they be so respectful to him? Wilderness God frowned. You mean that Yi Xian is really at the destiny-knowing state? Zhao Shenshao said, I can't be sure. But what I can be sure of is that even if Yi Xian isn't at the destiny-knowing state, he's definitely not an ordinary person. The Wilderness God glanced at Zhao Shenshao, a little speechless. Isn't that obvious? That guy is dressed in divine equipment. Even if he isn't at the destiny-knowing state, there must be a destiny-knowing state big shot behind him. At this point, he didn't say anything else. Zhao Shenshao smiled. Destiny-knowing state. Then, he looked into the distance with a complicated expression and said softly, do you think they'll get Yi Xian's help to break through the primordial spirit realm and reach the destiny-knowing state? Wilderness God's expression changed when he heard that. Zhao Shenshao said in a deep voice, it's not impossible. Wilderness God looked into the distance. Should we go and rely on him as well? Zhao Shenshao said nothing. After Yi Xian returned to the auction house, he continued to watch the auction. By then, he had already earned more than 500,000 heaven crystals. And the divine items were not even half sold. The lifetime collection of a destiny-knowing state super expert was naturally not an ordinary amount. Inside the pavilion, Xu Wang stood behind Yi Xian, holding the green profound sword in her hand. She was now Yi Xian's super bodyguard. At that moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the auction house below. The Zhao family wants all the divine items in today's auction. Everyone, please give my Zhao family some face. If it's what I want, don't bid. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.